Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. This is my live stream as a season review for House of the Dragon Season 1. So I'm going to be going through, let you know what I thought of it as a whole, as well as answering any of those burning questions that you may still have about what was going on, what we might expect going forward, all that kind of stuff. A couple of small things just to get out of the way before we get into it. Firstly, this is a charity live stream. I've been doing charity live streams all the way through this season, and we are at the moment on, I think, $6,800. It would be fantastic if we made it up to $7,000 during this live stream. This is all in aid of Alzheimer's care and research. Alzheimer's is an horrific disease. It really just rips a person apart bit by bit, and the family and everyone around them just has to watch them slowly disappear piece by piece. It is horrible. And so this is just going to help those people in that situation. And also for research, this is how we defeat these things. We just use science, and eventually we can hopefully make a small difference in the world. So that's what this is in aid of. There is somewhere, if you're watching live, there will be a donate button. In fact, if you're watching this back a little bit later, there will also be a donate button. Thank you so much for everyone who's donated through the season. Let's see if we can have a last push, see how much we can make today. Spoiler warning. It's the same as it always is on this channel. Book spoilers are absolutely fine. Fire and Blood has been out for a while. Show spoilers are not, but I think we're now at a position where we haven't really got any spoilers for season 2. So with book spoilers, it's a matter of this is what happens in the books. They've been roughly sticking to the books, but obviously there have been some quite significant changes sort of in the margins of the show. So don't assume that because something happened in the book, that's exactly what's going to be happening on the show. One bit of news as well in the wider world, things that I cover, The Witcher. This has been renewed for season 4, which is the good news. The slightly less good news, I think, is that we've also had confirmation that season 3, which we're going to see summer of next year, will be the last year that Henry Cavill will be Geralt. He will be replaced. We've had confirmation at the same time that he will be replaced by Liam Hemsworth. So that's the Hemsworth who was in the Hunger Games, not Thor, not the one who was in Westworld. Now, reaction to this, I think most people are quite frustrated, quite sad about this. I, as always, will hold judgment on Liam Hemsworth until I've seen him. I think that's only fair. But Henry Cavill did do an excellent job. There were some concerns to start with before we saw him, but his commitment to it, and also his performance and his commitment to trying to make sure that the character stayed as close as possible to the book version of Geralt, was commendable. So we have one more season of him. This is a House of the Dragon live stream. I did have a couple of questions from my patrons, which just to pick up on this. So I will do them first so that we can focus in on House of the Dragon in just one moment. 444 and Whitney both asked about this and my thoughts on this. 444 also asked about the wider picture with The Witcher, because there have been quite a few strange news items in the last couple of months. First, Blood Origin being cut from 6 episodes to 4. Secondly, one of the writers for The Witcher and Nightmare of the Wolf said that some writers of the main series, quote, actively disliked or mocked the source material. And now, of course, Henry Cavill has left the show. So what does this all add up to? Does it all add up to something concerning? Well, just for those who missed those other bits of news, the Blood Origin has, I think we can say pretty clearly, has had a troubled production. That's probably the most charitable way of saying it. It was, for those who don't know, that this was part of the idea, was that The Witcher would be Netflix, having got this big hit, thought, hey, we can make a franchise out of this. We can do lots of different shows, spin-offs, etc., etc. And the first of them came out, I think, last year, Nightmare of the Wolf, which was an anime. It was basically Vesemir's origin story, and it was good fun. I liked it, I have to say. I thought it was good. So I thought, solid start. Blood Origin, a 6-part live-action mini-series, which was to be telling the story of the origin of the Witchers. Now, the filming on this finished somewhere around a year ago. We had our first trailer for it about this time last year. I think it was November last year. And that trailer looked good without being great. It wasn't the kind of thing that made you run away and immediately go, I must see this, but it had cool-looking people doing cool-looking things. Michelle Yeoh was in it. It looked okay. But then the story started. First, we didn't get the series. Normally, The Witcher turns around post-production in about half a year, give or take. That milestone passed. People didn't really know what was going on. Then we heard they're coming back for reshoots, and this was 2 weeks well after the end of shooting, which was a little bit strange. And then also with a completely new director, which again was a little bit odd. Then we heard that they'd decided to add in a framing device for this, where we have Jaskier, Dandelion in there, and also a new character who will be sort of telling the story and linking it into the main Witcher story, which seemed to imply they didn't think that the show itself had gave a strong enough thread across to allow viewers to understand exactly what was going on. Then, since then, we also had confirmation that this has been changed from 6 episodes. It was filmed as 6 episodes and will show as only 4 episodes, which is very odd, because normally, obviously, you write an episode of a TV show. It has a natural arc. The direction has a natural arc, and they've carved this up and chopped it down. We can only assume a huge amount of material has ended up on the cutting room floor. And finally, they've announced it will be released December the 25th this year, Christmas Day, which they can get away with saying this is the traditional Witcher Christmas spot, but in reality, I mean, how many people, certainly in sort of America and Western Europe, will be sitting down to watch The Witcher on Christmas Day? I suspect not many. So this is sort of sneaking it out. Does all this add up to something? Well, I hope not. I think what we can say, though, is that Blood Origin is definitely going to be troubled. The Witcher Season 3, I think, will be the test of this, because there were apparently some creative differences in Witcher Season 2. Witcher Season 3, if that continues a downward descent, then I'll start getting worried. But unless, there's always another side to these stories, so until we hear some sort of confirmation, then I think that we just have to fingers crossed on this. One thing with Henry Cavill leaving, obviously, this is an active decision on his part. Yes, he's an in-demand actor. Yes, he's accepted Superman. He's coming back as Superman. But this will have been a decision on his part. He could have said no to Superman. Maybe he's got some other projects that we don't even know about yet. But he has prioritized other projects over The Witcher, which it's his decision, and so I've absolutely no problem with him making whatever decisions he thinks is best for his career, but it does seem to imply that perhaps he wasn't or isn't as in love with the project as many people had thought. Lost for Words, thank you so much for incredibly generous donation there, so thank you. I hugely appreciate it. Let's just flicking through just one thing for the chat, actually. in terms, one rumor which has come out from this, which is sort of segueing nicely into House of the Dragon, one rumor which has come out of this is maybe this then frees up a little bit of extra room for Henry Cavill to be covering or to be doing a role as a Targaryen in somewhere in the history of House Targaryen. This is something which has come up a lot since, I think, really that first promo picture of him in the long blonde wig as Geralt of Rivia, and people said he could pull off the Targaryen look. And the biggest thing that people have been suggesting is Aegon the Conqueror. And I have mixed feelings on this, but I would love to get a kind of temperature from you guys. If you are watching this live, I will read these out in just a moment, just so we get a feel of what people think. But if you're watching this live, in the chat, just write Henry yes or Henry no for if you think he would be a good Aegon the Conqueror. I would just be fascinated what people gut instinct is, whether or not he would be good for that kind of role. Let's so there's also a link. Greet Willwards put, I think, in the chat a link if you wish to donate directly. I will make sure that goes into the description for people afterwards if you don't wish to donate through here. Just having a quick flick through. Henry no, Henry no, yes, Henry yes, Henry yes, Henry yes, Henry yes, Henry yes, yes, no, no, yes. Yeah, it's quite mixed actually. It's I've I kind of got that impression from people. Some people think that this would be excellent, but quite a lot of people have got a different idea of what Aegon the Conqueror is. So I've heard Kardik Prabhu saying, make a poll. I would love to, if I had the technological ability to do that, or maybe if I had a guest on so that I could take a few moments to do that. But in terms of an idea that I've seen which would work, Maegor the Cruel, I think would probably work quite well for him as a slightly bulkier Targaryen. A lot of the Targaryens are quite lithe, yeah, he's definitely the bulkier type, and I think someone like Maegor the Cruel with his raw strength would work quite well. Okay, anyway, this is supposed to be the House of the Dragon season 1 review. So some quick thoughts before we get into some questions. Overall, I loved it. I thought it was great. They had a huge uphill task, I think, with the hardcore Song of Ice and Fire fandom after what happened with Game of Thrones season 8. Now, I lost track of the amount of people I know who said after season 8 of Game of Thrones, that's it, I'm done with this. I'll wait for the next book, but no more TV shows. And then slowly over time, as the promo stuff came out, the trailers happened, as the interviews with the showrunners and George R. R. Martin happened, and then finally, once the show happened, the amount of people who went from being absolutely down on this idea to being 100% sold on it, I lost track. This has worked so well. I'm beyond thrilled for how well this is. That doesn't mean it was perfect be in any stretch of the imagination, but I think this was as good as they could possibly have done. So round of applause, first of all, to the showrunners, the writers, and everybody else involved with this. So what I think worked really well as a whole was the way that they managed to take the source material, which is it's quite strange when you look at it and try and think about how you'd adapt it, because there is a lot in there, but it's also the amount of actual source material they've got is quite limited. It's only a couple of 100 pages that will stretch over probably 4 seasons. And in terms of dialogue, there's not much. There's a few lines here and there, but they had to pretty much write all of the dialogue. There have been some changes, and I have to admit, I don't think I've hated any of them. There have been a couple that I I'm not so sure about. There have been a couple that I've thought that maybe, or not a couple, in aggregate, there are some of the changes which I thought have shifted the feel of the story away from being a story where a lot of people make clear decisions and wanting to do stuff, and moving it more towards a series of misunderstandings and accidents that got us to the point we're at. I think they've handled that well. The problem could have been that rid people of agency. I think they've managed to get around that. But overall, the look, the feel, the language, the graphics, the music again was fantastic. The acting was amazing. So I'm very happy with this. And the other thing to note, I think, as far as I'm concerned, is the quality across the season. And this is quite rare, actually. Normally, when you get a season of a TV show, you'll go, well, that was the excellent episode, and then there was a really duff one, and then maybe there were a couple of filler episodes that they did. In this, for me anyway, it carried on at the same level all the way through. There were a couple of highs. I thought episode 8, the Viserys' death, that episode, I thought that was fantastic. I thought that was brilliant. But every single episode I thought worked really, really well. So let me know what you think in the chat, by the way. Andrew K saying, absolutely loved it. Appealed to both hardcore book fans, and the sheer quality on any level should attract just about anyone. Mathieu saying they did an amazing job. It will enable so much more. And Ashlu Dagar saying Henry for Cregan Stark. Yeah, I love the idea. He would make a good Stark. I think the only problem with that, though, is Cregan Stark should be younger. He should not as young as Jacaerys, but certainly not as old as Rhaenyra. So he should be young. Ari Fan Geek saying the action was horrible. You've got to say that. I think they're afraid that we'll notice something, so they made every battle in thick fog or very dark. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing. If I had to pick out a concern that I think, and they have recognized this, the showrunners, they have acknowledged this, that it was some of it was quite dark, particularly whichever episode number it was over on Driftmark, when they had Aemond claiming Vhagar and all of those things happening on the beach outside. That was, they got the contrast wrong, and yeah, I think that they would admit it. I quite liked the fog with the dragon battle at the end. That was as per the book. It should have been a storm there, and I think they used it really well in a way that meant that it added to the tension, that they were looking around, where is, we were there with Luke, where is he, where's Vhagar, and then you could see Vhagar just above. I thought that was a great shot as well. So yeah, there were, I mean, it wasn't perfect, as I say, but I think there was a lot to love. Henry Orvana saying, do you think they could have benefited by making the build-up to the dance last 2 seasons rather than 1? A full season with the younger main actors and then a full season with the kids? I don't know. I think this is quite a hard one to say, because I think they did a good job. The biggest problem they had, I think, was the time jumps, is that they made what I think was the right decision in starting this with, it was a sort of a prologue flashback bit, but 101 with the Great Council, and then it ends in 129. That's nearly 3 decades. And doing the time jumps as they did, keeping the most of the main cast the same all the way through, allowed some degree of continuity. And I heard a couple of people saying they found it a little disjointed because of that. I don't think there was really a way of getting around it. Personally, I thought they did as good a job as possible. Could they have done that in 2 seasons? Well, one of the things which is, I think, very clear is that they made a decision early on. They were going to have long episodes. This was not just a couple of episodes will spill over. every episode, pretty much with maybe one or two exceptions, was over an hour, well over an hour. Compared to Game of Thrones early seasons, where it was 40-something minutes, you've got an extra 50%. So this was really the equivalent of 1.5 seasons compared to the early seasons of Game of Thrones, for example. And I think if there'd been more, it would have felt a bit stretched. That's my personal take. If we'd had 2 seasons of build-up, in order for it to work, the balance to work, then I think we'd have needed 5-6 seasons of the dance itself, and I think that would have been a little bit too much. I've just noticed we hit 7,000. Thank you so much, everyone. $7,000 for the for Alzheimer's care and research. You have no idea how much this means to me. Thank you. I hugely appreciate it. Let's not stop there. If you're still here, if you are enjoying the live stream, if you can afford it, and let's see whether we can get it a little bit higher, that would be fantastic. But thank you if you have donated. That is incredibly generous of you. Stephanie Frederick saying they've done a great job considering there isn't a likable person in the whole bunch, those Targaryens. Yeah, I think so. They have softened some of the characters. It has to be said. That's a creative decision that they've made. And so Daemon is a lot softer as a character. He should be feel dangerous to be around, but a lot of the time he just felt like he was just observing events, and he seemed most content at times when he was just like sitting down and playing Happy Families. So I think his character was softened. Similarly, they softened Alicent, at least making her understandable. I think if you, at the beginning of the season, if you said to any of the book readers, do you think you'll come out from this feeling like you understand and to a degree sympathize with Alicent, then everyone would have said no chance whatsoever. But they did do that. They made us see from her perspective a lot of things, particularly the fact that making her being married to Viserys, actually showing it for what it was. She was very young and he was a lot older than her, and she was there as a marriage of political advantage for the Hightowers, not something that she particularly wanted to do. And then this whole confusion over Viserys's last words, it was a clear attempt to make us feel a bit more sympathy, and I think it was a successful attempt. Now, what that has meant is that they have, and I think again this was deliberate, was to get us to the point where this isn't where most book readers were, a clear case of the blacks are obviously in the right and the greens have just launched a coup. Now we might still think that, but we go, well, but we kind of understand why Alicent's there, and we at least understand that she seems to be trying to avoid a war at this point, whereas in the book there was no hint that she was trying to avoid a war. I think somebody was saying about Monkey Tron saying, I wonder if the show will forget that Laenor is still alive when someone tries to claim his dragon. This was one of the things that I loved, which was the shifts and the way that they can make us think, us being book readers, actually go, oh, hang on a moment, is that possible? How does that work? And then with a deep understanding of the lore, leading us to other questions. So for those who were just watching the show, they may well not have thought that this was significant. I thought, okay, so Laenor escaped. Well done him. He got away. He's over in Essos with his lover. He's got out of this. So that's a relief. But book readers will have gone, well, hang on a moment. What does this mean for Seasmoke, his dragon? Does this mean that the dragon Seasmoke is going to bond with someone else? Does this mean that Laenor is going to die anyway, but not there? Does this mean that Laenor's mysteriously going to come back and pretend to be a bastard child of House Velaryon? There are lots of possibilities, but I'm feeling convinced that the showrunner and the writers care enough about George R. R. Martin's world that they will come up with something which matches the lore that we've got going on there. And they added to it. This is the other element of this, is that they added to the lore in ways which are not just, let's throw out what George R. R. Martin wrote, but let's add a little bit over here. The things that Viserys was talking about when he was talking about Old Valyria, when he's saying things like, and so the dragon riders lived close to the mountain because that was the source of their power. That's the kind of thing which sparks 1,000 theories. When we have this dragons out of control emphasis, where I've got a question about this later, I'll talk about it a bit more then, but when we have that as an emphasis, that allows us to look again at so much of what has happened in Targaryen history and go, should we look at this in a completely different way? Is our understanding of the bond between the rider and the dragon fundamentally wrong? Because we've always said, obviously, dragons are independent. They're not just horses, but are they even more independent than we thought before? That certainly seems to be the case here. J.S. Keegan saying, hi, Robert. First time I've managed to catch you live. Happy to be here. Well, welcome. Good to do get stuck in with the chat. They're a good bunch there. James Braheny saying, I don't think Ryan Condal will change things as much as the showrunners from Game of Thrones did. He doesn't have a chip on his shoulder like them. Yeah, I don't think he's given the impression of wanting to change things any more than he needs to in order to adapt page to screen. And you do every single adaptation. Always have to come back to this. Every single adaptation will have some changes simply because it's necessary when you're telling a story through a different medium. But also some changes that he thinks will add to the story, and not in a way of, well, the original was not good, but honoring the original. So yeah, I think that's definitely the case. Let's go to a question. Oh, no, one more thing overall before I get into the questions, actually, which is that we do have to, and we've said this before, but I think it's definitely worth mentioning. This was huge for HBO. This was a massive gamble for them. The media's attention was all over on the Rings of Power in terms of this is going to dictate the future of Amazon Studios and things like that, which I'm sure was true, but this was also dictating the future of HBO. This Game of Thrones was massive for them. Obviously, it was the biggest TV show in the world ever. It was ridiculous. And then they've come up with this spin-off, this follow-on. And as we know, they've got 8 others in pre-production that could come forward. They spent a huge amount of money on House of the Dragon. It was a massive gamble. If it had not worked, then they would have had to change the way that they were going with this. Now it has worked. Now it has been a massive success. And also, incidentally, as a complete byproduct of this, streaming views of Game of Thrones shot back up. Is that this isn't just attracting new viewers for House of the Dragon. This was, in the first couple of weeks of House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones was back in the top 10 of most streamed shows anywhere. And that, I think, tells you all you need to know, that is that there hadn't been a new episode of that in 3 years, but people were just trying to find it. More people were watching that than things like the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. That's the impact this has had. And that will allow them to be doing these other spin-offs. We've not heard any news yet on them. I was hoping we would get one at the end of the season. Obviously, they're not ready yet. But at some point soon, we are going to get announcements that some of these spin-offs are going to be taken forward. And that is because House of the Dragon was a success. If House of the Dragon had not been a success, we would not have any other spin-offs. The fact that it is means we will get some. Not all of them. George R. R. Martin is very clear on that, and he's very realistic about this. We're not suddenly going to get a new Game of Thrones spin-off show debuting every few months. this isn't going to go the way of something like Star Wars, where you can expect a few new things every year. But this is potentially going to be in a world where in 2 or 3 years' time, we might have not just House of the Dragon still going, but an anime that's happened, a mini series, and something else in the works. So expect lots more. Another view saying, I'd say George R. R. Martin's input and participation may have been a major factor in HBO greenlighting it. Yes, it was, and it's very clear if you read a lot of the recent things from George R. R. Martin and Ryan Condal as well. It seems very clear that after season 8 of Game of Thrones, after whatever happened with the Long Night spin-off that they did a pilot for and decided not to go ahead with. That was expensive, by the way. That was $35 million down the drain. After all that, they decided that the best way was to stick as closely as possible to what George R. R. Martin has written, which is why they did this show, because he's written the story already. Now they can branch out a little bit more into other things. But the reason why only one of the spin-offs is something in the future for the timeline of A Song of Ice and Fire is because everything else is in the past, and George R. R. Martin therefore has got a clear idea on what happened then. In the future, he's obviously not even written the ending of A Song of Ice and Fire, so that's a little bit more up in the air. Let's go. I'll come back to the chat. Well, I'll try and dig into as much as I can in the chat as we're going. But let's go to a question from George R. Tolkien saying, salutations, Robert. Salutations to you, sir. I wanted to ask what you thought of the changes they made in the show to Borros Baratheon's character. In the books, they made it clear he chose the Greens over the Blacks because Aegon was a boy. Do you think we will see any more changes like this in seasons to come? Now, great question. In terms of I'll talk about Borros himself in just a moment, but in terms of the changes to characters, we've already had a few changes to characters. I mentioned a couple earlier on. Daemon has been made a lot softer as a character. Alicent's been made a lot more nuanced. So expect to see some changes, and some changes will be quite significant. I think Mysaria, she didn't get too many lines in the book, but I think Mysaria will turn into a really quite pivotal character with doing a lot of things not with the same motivations that she had, with completely different motivations. Larys Strong, the clubfoot, also appears to have completely different motivations, though do keep an eye on him. I think he is as seedy and borderline sociopathic, but I do wonder whether there's an extra layer that they will reveal later on with him. If they've made such huge changes to that character or clarifications of that character, that I think that there may well be some more coming up. So expect some changes, some shifts, some more rounding characters out a bit more. What you'll find, particularly when we get characters like the Dragon Seeds, who we'll be meeting probably in season 2. The Dragon Seeds are great characters, but we only really get a bit on each of them. Expect most of those characters to get fleshed out quite a bit more. And that will then perhaps allow us to view some of them in slightly different ways. So, book spoilers, but when we get there, Hugh Hammer, Ulf White basically change sides. And in Fire and Blood, the clear implication is that Hugh Hammer just wants power. Ulf White is just a drunken old sot, which may be what they do on the show, but experience from characters on the show is that they have tried to nuance these things a lot more. So expect extra layers to those characters. In terms of Borros Baratheon, I think this is an interesting one because in the book, the Baratheons, we shouldn't forget, are at the time one of the most powerful families in Westeros. You've got the Targaryens at the top, then you get 3 families underneath: the Hightowers, the Velaryons, and the Baratheons. Those are the 3 big powerhouses at the time. Obviously, we've met the Hightowers and the Velaryons a lot, but now when we come to the Baratheons, it's a big deal what they do. And of the noble families that are in play for trying to get them onto your side, the Starks are so far north that they won't play a part for at least a year. In the Vale, there have been 2-3 attempted coups in recent years. Yes, they've got some very famous knights, but they tend to kind of stay where they are and not get so much involved in politics. So the Baratheons are the big prize. Now, what seems to be described in the book is that the Team Green had an advantage, a time advantage, that they didn't really on the show. On the show, the coronation happened the next day. News of it arrived very quickly over in Dragonstone. And the Rhaenyra's the loss of her child, which I've got a question about that coming up. That happened. That took a long time. She was in labor for a long time, a couple of days. And then she was completely out of it for quite a while afterwards. So the Black response was quite delayed. The Greens had an advantage, and they sent Aemond on Vhagar to basically say, how can we get you onto our side? What do we need to do to get you onto our team? And coming on Vhagar, so the king's brother on the biggest, mightiest dragon there is, obviously is quite impressive. And Borros Baratheon seemed to have warmed to this idea and has said, and then started negotiation and said, well, what can we have? What are you offering us? And Aemond basically says, okay, well, I will marry one of your daughters. And what this means is that the Baratheons are then part of the royal family. So a big offer, a big deal on the table. Then along comes Lucerys Targaryen on the back of Arrak's very small dragon, small rider, arrives with his little note that says, Rhaenyra says you need to support her now. And so Borros Baratheon understandably goes, well, hang on a minute. You're just saying you need to now support me. You're taking me for granted. Over here, they've just offered me to be a part of the royal family. Can you do that? And he looks at Lucerys and he sort of says, which of my daughters are you going to marry? And Lucerys says, well, yeah, technically I'm already engaged, so I can't marry any of them. And so coming out from that, Borros Baratheon, understandably, particularly when the dragon battle happens that we know, and Aemond on Vhagar shows how impressive Vhagar is. Obviously, the Baratheons in that situation would think, well, maybe I should edge towards the Greens. And so they do, but in a very clever way, in as much as the Greens then say, great, so you're on our team, send us your army. And Borros Baratheon goes, yeah, I'm just gathering my army together now. Takes a little while to do it. And then once he's got his army together, he goes, unfortunately, those Dornish are being a little bit annoying. We just need to go and deal with that problem. We'll be with you in a moment. And he basically sits in Storm's End and waits to see what happens. He might technically have agreed to side with the Greens, but he waits to see what happens. He waits all the way through until Rhaenyra, having taken King's Landing and then being forced out from King's Landing, and King's Landing is a complete mess, that's when he comes up and claims King's Landing. And it's like, I'm now swooping in to take control. And he is, and at that point, he then tries to get his one of his daughters married to the king. So he thought, actually, now I can get an upgrade. I was going to get one of my daughters married to the king's brother. Now I can get married to the king himself. So basically, Borros Baratheon in the book is he's a political opportunist, and that's where he falls. This is the way, actually, incidentally, he gets described in the book. Lord Boromund, who was his father, was stone hard and strong and unmoving. Lord Borros was the wind that rages and howls and blows this way and that. So that's the character we've got here, is this character who kind of moves with the political tide. Maybe doesn't have any particularly strong convictions, but he is a bit canny about staying back. This is sort of echoed a little bit by what happened with the Tyrells during Robert's Rebellion, incidentally. If you cast your mind forward all the way to that, the Tyrells were Team Mad King. That's who they were on. And they brought their army out and they fought one battle and won, but then didn't force home the advantage. And instead, they marched all the way over to Storm's End and besieged it. Not in a way of I'm attacking this every day, but simply encircled it, camped up there, and had a nice picnic for about a year. That was what they did, and they stayed out of it. And the moment that Ned Stark, after the end of the war, once it was obvious who'd won, Ned Stark turns up with his army. They all go, up. It's a fair cop. We were on the losing side, but we admit defeat, and they went back home again. Stayed out of the battle as much as is possible until they knew who had won. That's what the Baratheons broadly were doing during the Dance of the Dragon. It would be interesting to see whether they stick with that as a kind of a feel for how the Baratheons work. Another view saying, so Lord Baratheon's daughter didn't goad Aemond. Interesting choice by the writers. Yeah, so they had a lot to do in that last episode. This is, I thought, well, I liked the last episode, but they did charge through quite a few of these things. So that scene in Storm's End is actually smaller than what was in the book. So in the book, and given how little detail we have on lots of scenes, that was noticeable. There, what happened was that Aemond, yes, he acts all kind of bullying and things like that. He tries to take the Rhaenyra's letter off of Lucerys. He sort of comes over sort of all, oh, you little boy kind of way. But also the Lord Baratheon's daughter, who he'd just effectively become betrothed to, then sort of goads him and saying, what, are you just going to let him get away with it? You're not going to follow. You're not going to do anything about that. And so he does head out. And it's never quite clear whether this was because he got goaded or he was going anyway. But that seems to have been, that was definitely there and was quite an important part of that narrative. And they took that out, perhaps to focus in on this moment that we had about the lack of control over dragons. So rather than us seeing, well, there's lots of different reasons why this happened, actually, that's the main reason why it happened. Let's go to Billy B. 501st Legion. Aemond in the book wanted to try the nectar of all the Borros daughters in order to check which one he will pick up. That was what Mushroom said. And this is what the interesting thing is, obviously, is that the way that Fire and Blood is written is not as an objective account of what happened. It's a history book with a number of sources, some of which are clearly right, some of which are clearly wrong. And a lot of them are, well, maybe that's how it turned out. So Mushroom is always the most entertaining of the different sources, but he's not, and he's sometimes right, I'm sure, but he's not right all the time. Yeah, some people saying I prefer the show versions, that Aemond wasn't so easily manipulated. And people saying, yeah, that's what his brother would do. So, yeah, I mean, I understand. That's the kind of thing, is that this was a change. and they did cut it down from what was in the book. But in terms of the character that they've got for Aemond, I think that works better. Let's go to a question from 444 saying, "Hi Robert, what did you enjoy the most in season 1 and what the least? I loved that creators in House of the Dragon managed to stay very faithful to the book while also including some differences. But what about what to change? I didn't enjoy the title sequence. I understand the idea and knowing the family tree is very useful for the show, but I think it was done in a very confusing way, which wasn't clear for many viewers. As well, the season was dark in tone and intense, but I wouldn't mind some humor from time to time." Well, yeah, in terms of, I mean, I talked about what I enjoyed and didn't enjoy so much, but just to pick up on these couple of things here. The title sequence, I understand exactly where you're coming from. I think that given the fact that after the title sequence was introduced, even sort of many book fans had to be told what it meant, seems to imply that it's not intuitively clear that this is the bloodline of the Targaryens. And it moves over, if I'm critiquing it, it moves over the different bits of the family tree so quickly you don't know who's who. You just see, oh, there's some people that looks like there's a little sigil on there, but I haven't got a chance to stop and see what it is. The Game of Thrones intro sequence allowed people very quickly to understand what was going on and a little bit of the geography, and it did that by simply said Winterfell and things like that. You knew what we were being shown. So I do wonder whether they could tweak it a little bit without changing the concept. I like the concept. I like this is all on Viserys's big Valyria model. I like the idea of showing the bloodline, and this works really well if you're going to try and take this as a concept, as a show, and have it as this kind of anthology show, which is the idea, that they have it as an anthology show, not just the Dance of the Dragons, but other bits of Targaryen history. So you can see where we're at in Targaryen history by where we are in the family tree. So I like that. But I do think that perhaps they could make it more obvious what it is that we're seeing. So we have 3 people to start with. Maybe you could have the names just written there, so that we can see who that is and then where the bloodlines come off from that. And then when we get to King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne, and then you get all of the sort of lines going off of them because they had so many different children, maybe just, so we can actually see Jaehaerys, Alysanne. That I think would just make it a whole lot easier for people to understand exactly what was going on. I think somebody somewhere has done a video going through and explaining it all. I think the fact it has to be explained does imply that it's not quite intuitive enough. So I get that. In terms of the tone being dark and intense, wouldn't mind some humor. I mean, I love a little bit of humor in these kinds of things. I think Game of Thrones did that very well in the early seasons when you have characters like, say, Tyrion, who are just naturally funny, and they can just drop some humor in there. I don't mind this not having much humor, personally. One of the things George R. R. Martin has said that he wants from all of these spin-offs is for them each to have slightly different, not just tones, but potentially different types of shows, different genres. So we might, for example, expect, if it happens, the 9 Voyages of Corlys Velaryon to be a lot more kind of like a high adventure and Sinbad type style. Then we might get another one which could be, maybe Dunk and Egg could be written and done as a lot more kind of family friendly, a lot more humor in there. That would work really well for that, I think. So if we're taking those as, we've got different ways of doing this. House of the Dragon was always going to feel a lot like Game of Thrones because this was the easy win for HBO. Let's make something that is straight back to basics. What do people like? Well, they like Targaryens, they like dragons, they like the political intrigue with a hint of fantasy. This is House of the Dragon. But it's got a slight twist, which is it is darker. It's not got the the lighter elements to it, and I'm okay with that. What I wouldn't want is for all of the spin-offs to have that same kind of feel. I would want different moods for each of the different shows. But this is a show which is about a family breakdown leading to civil war in which thousands of people die. This is not a cheery story. This is something that we should be seeing the tragedy of it. So, as I say, I'm okay with it. I can understand why, and a little bit of humor might sort of break the tension a bit, but I didn't miss it in season one. I didn't come to it and think, oh, you know what would have actually made this better if we'd had a few laughs along the way. Yes, maybe if they'd had a character who was naturally more comedic, and we could get a few. I think if Damon lightened up a bit, Matt Smith has got a good sort of comedy head on him. I think he can do a few little things here and there. They could inject a little bit, but I'm okay with it myself. Brothers Crin saying, hi there, by the way, Brothers Crin, saying, I'd argue that this does indeed have the tone of Hamlet with a touch of Henry IV. I mean, I think, yeah, it's certainly the tragedy. This is the way we're going. I mean, there was definitely a King Lear-ish element to some of what we saw with the downfall of Viserys. Divine Charaka saying we need Duncan Egg ASAP. Yeah, I would love Duncan Egg. It has to be right though. It has to be right. The feel I get just from the mood music is that this is probably one of the ones that's least developed. If I had to guess which is closest to production, it probably one of the animes, maybe the YT anime, and probably the Nine Voyages one. It's certainly close to a point where they have to make a decision on. If they're on, as I hear, fourth draft, at some point, you have to make a decision on those kinds of things. A Poor Artist Acrylics by Shannon saying, as much as I like Bronn and Sandor, I don't want House of the Dragon to be Game of Thrones 2. Plus, I laugh quite a bit at some of Damon's quips. Yep, absolutely. CB Norwood saying Duncan Egg would be lighter. Yeah, it definitely should be. And just flicking through, Ivy Blackfire saying, I liked the title sequence. I yelled at the TV when I saw Aegon's sapphire. I really liked it. Yeah, so I think it's the kind of thing that you can appreciate, but I don't think it's user-friendly so much. Billy B501st Legion saying the tapestry joke was good. Yes, that I did like that one. So there were some good jokes in there. JS Keegan saying, do you think the show would benefit from having 13 episodes a season like The Sopranos had? I feel like that would have made the season feel a lot less rushed in places, Harwin Strong being an example. So I think one of the downsides of the way that they did it was that we did miss out a lot in the time jumps. Harwin Strong, I think, is probably the biggest example of this. A lot of the Strongs as well. Lionel Strong, I think we missed out on. He had 10 years as Hand of the King that we didn't see any of it. And Harwin Strong, we saw one scene of him carrying Rhaenyra out over his shoulder, and then the next time we see him, he's there, father of her children, in this kind of slightly weird family unit that they had, and we didn't see any of that, and it would have been nice to see some of that. So that, I think, was the big miss from all of this. Not a miss as in I think they got it wrong. I think I can understand the creative decision that got there, but I think that we as viewers missed quite a bit out of that. In terms of 13 episodes, as I said before, these are long episodes. So my general take is I think they like the 10 episode feel. That's the kind of length that they want to go to. Now, could they make season 2 be 13 episodes of 45 minutes rather than 10 episodes of 60 minutes? They could do if they want to. That wouldn't change too much in filming time. I wouldn't have thought that wouldn't change too much in post-production. And it would allow, obviously, for it to go on longer and people to be talking about the show for longer during the year. So maybe they could. That would allow stories to be more drawn out. But what they tried to do with this was to bring some events together to kind of add to what was going on. So, for example, the Borros Baratheon being unwell, maybe nearly dead, so Vaemond coming in and making his case before the throne, and Viserys dying the next day. Those things happened far apart in the timeline in the book, but they got brought together. Now, what that meant was that episode therefore became really intense, and it became really tight, and it gave Viserys the opportunity to show that scene when he walks in, when he's struggling to get up the steps, and Daemon goes and helps him at the end, and he's there, his last push to make things right, to support his daughter's claim. That was only possible because they squashed some of the timeline together. So if they can continue to do it in that kind of way, in a way which honors the source material and also adds to the quality of what we see, then I will be very happy, and I'm very happy with 10 episodes. If they want to tell the long story, then yeah, you can make it 13 episodes. What I don't want to do is sacrifice the amount of the show that we get. Let's go to a question from 444. Who is the worst and best parent in the show? There are so many examples of bad parenting that I can't decide, and I'm not sure if there are any good parents there. I would love in the chat, let me know who you think maybe the worst and best parents are. In terms of, I'll try and pick out a few ones that, if not good, then certainly there was there were some good elements to it. So I think Lena looked like she may well have been quite a good parent to her two daughters. And also, for a time, perhaps Daemon was a good father to them. One of the deleted scenes we get, or we know that is there, is after Lena's death. On the show, they made it look like Daemon just walked off and left his daughters there to mourn, but there was a deleted scene where he gives them both a really big hug and they all cry together, and they took that out presumably to try and make his character feel still this kind of enigmatic, dangerous person, but for the show character that we have, that I think would have still worked for me. Now, so I think that he perhaps wasn't, and I think Rhaenys, when she took it, because obviously the two daughters then got separated up. One went to Rhaenyra, one went to Rhaenys. Rhaenys seems to have done a reasonably good job there. I'd mentioned it a moment ago, but that family unit of Rhaenyra and Harwin, it was a really awkward dynamic that they had to deal with, but it looks like they created a loving environment for their children, which is really positive thing in that environment that we had there. I think Helaena seems to come across as really loving her children. She certainly seems to be one of the few who seems to spend time with them. She's there, yes, she's got a sort of a nanny or something looking after them, but she's in the same room. Someone like, well, her husband, Aegon, as far as I can tell, doesn't spend any time with his children, so he's more obviously at the bad parent end. A couple of people in the chat saying Lionel Strong, yes, I think he did a really good job. Then bad parents, Otto, worst parent Otto. So I would agree. Sasa K saying number one dad, pardon me, number one dad in House of the Dragon is clearly Harwin. He's done well. Kais Ballerina saying the worst and best parent is the same person, Viserys. Best parent, his only child, Rhaenyra. Worst parent to the other four that might as well not exist. Yeah, he didn't seem to spend... I mean, he loved the idea of having a son, but he didn't seem to spend all that much time looking after them. Just having a quick username redacted. Worst parent is Aegon, left his kid in the fighting pit. Yeah, absolutely. That was pretty bad, wasn't it? Otto, Emma Shyman saying Otto, worst parent. Emma, the best parent. She certainly seemed to be good. We didn't see much of her. It has to, it has to be said. She was obviously gone in the first episode. And Mark Shisa saying Rhaenyra's kids turned out good, so she did a good job there. Yeah, I mean, it's very noticeable that when you look at that generation down, so Alicent's kids, I mean, Helaena apart, and we've obviously not seen Diren yet, but the other two, you wouldn't say that they've turned out particularly well, but her two that we've seen, obviously she's got a third Joffrey that we've not seen much of. Rhaenyra's, they seem quite good kids, given everything that they've had to live through. They seem to be thoughtful and caring, and I mean, there was a really overlooked little moment with I think it was Jacaerys when he wished to be partly making a point, partly trying to move the party on at Viserys's farewell supper, and so he asks Helaena to dance, which she's obviously very happy to do. And now what is noticeable is that just before that, he just quickly leans over to his newly betrothed and just whispers something into her ear. And it's very much like a, just so you know, I'm just about to do this. Don't worry about it. It's all okay. And that, I think, actually says quite a lot, and it says a lot, I think, for the writers or the actor. I don't know who came up with that idea, but to show that there was an emotional intelligence there, that he couldn't just go about asking random people for dances without acknowledging that and making sure that it was okay. Mike Boy saying Rhaenyra isn't terrible, but good might be a stretch. Perhaps. Okay, I mean, I think there's a lot of really interesting points going on here. Let's go to a question from Lady Pushkins saying, hello, Robert. I hope Dan, that's my dog, has his Halloween costume ready. He's not really a costume kind of dog, and he's not a big fan of this kind of year. Lots of fireworks. He doesn't like fireworks. Anyway, interested to hear what you made of Helaena covering her ears when Daemon killed Vaemond. I would have expected eyes. Thank you. Well, yeah, so this was an interesting looking at what people's reactions were when, so Vaemon's there, makes his case, Viserys basically says no, and Daemon slices half of his head off. And the reactions from lots of people were fascinating. Helaena does cover her ears. She covers her ears and turns her head away. So it's like she doesn't want any of this. She's like that. So I don't think it was just a matter of she did her ears and there's some sort of significance in that. I think this was just she just didn't want to see what just happened, and also she didn't want to hear people's reactions to it. So one of the things with Helaena is that they are, I think, and I do not know this, I've not heard the showrunner say anything like this, but it does seem as if they're trying to portray her as perhaps being neurodivergent. That's obviously not something that in world they would talk about. In the book, she's just called things like simple or happy and things like that. But that is quite particularly a lot of neurodivergent or autistic people would just, when there's too much input, just try and shut it down. They do not, the inputs are too much. So that works really well for me. I liked when I went back and had another look at her reaction there, and that just felt quite honest. Also, what felt honest was Aemon's reaction when Daemon does it, and he's just there going, so that's what you can do if you're a second. If you're the second son, your brother's a king. You can just chop people's heads off. And there is definitely he's definitely viewing Daemon not just as a rival, but as somebody. There's a deep admiration there as well. So when they had their kind of standoff there at the end of episode 8. Which is obviously foreshadowing a standoff later on, but it's in comes Daemon, and basically Aemond backs down in a way that he probably wouldn't back down with anyone else, because he has this, although he can't voice it, this immense respect for Daemon. Let's go to a question from Alejandro Martinez saying, hello, Robert. Hello. Maybe I missed it, but it looked like these last 2 episodes were ratless. What do you think happened there? Happy spooky season. Happy spooky season to you too. Yeah, so this is, to go back a step here, this is something perhaps you didn't notice, or some people didn't notice in the show, was the use of rats. It's they had them just in the Red Keep, but they were there through quite a few episodes. I think 4, probably most noticeably just when we had episode and Joffrey Lonmouth has been killed, and there's a pool of blood on the ground, and you see there's a rat just lapping away at that, really quite grim and icky, as that's the background to the rushed ceremony happening. And the rats appear in various other episodes, just sort of scuttling along a fireplace or just in the background somewhere. And it felt as if this was more than just trying to create some medieval feel. It felt very much as if they were trying to show us something. Now, what happened? Why weren't there any of the last couple of episodes? Well, there weren't any in the last episode because we weren't in King's Landing, and this was largely set in Dragonstone, but obviously we also went to Storm's End, and this is based in the Red Keep. This is where we see the rats. And the penultimate episode, I think they would have been just a little bit of a distraction. But was this just random? No, this was deliberate to put rats there, and this was building to something, but it was building to something which is going to happen at the beginning of season 2. That's my take, is that this is not something that is there to... I mean, there might be another layer. This is one of the great fan theories which is going out. The Laris is a skin changer who skin changes into rats. Loved that theory. I thought that was great. I don't think we've got any evidence for it yet, but I think that it's a really fun theory. But what this is building up to Blood and Cheese. This is showing that, why are there so many rats? Everybody can see there are lots of rats there, therefore you need to have rat catchers. Now, this is one of these, and hashtag book spoilers, but this is one of those things which is actually quite big in the arc of A Song of Ice and Fire, is that there were lots of rats there. And so they had rat catchers who were hired to catch the rats. But then that is one of the... when we get cheese, that's what's going on there. knows their way around the Red Keep, and so this is just building us up to this idea that there are rat catchers around because there are so many rats. And I say that this is a long-term thing going through a Song of Ice and Fire, because what happens after Blood and Cheese is the obvious, well, we can't have this, all these rat catchers going around. Why don't we just have cats? Obvious answer. Cats can catch the rats. And that leads all the way up to Game of Thrones, where you get Arya chasing the cats around the Red Keep. This is where she's at. And the irony will be, almost certainly, I think, is that she will work her way back into the Red Keep. She will sneak in the same way that she's snuck in. She will be sneaking in using her knowledge from the cats, who are only there because they got rid of the rat catchers, because they didn't want people with knowledge of the Red Keep like that. So that's the very long narrative arc we've got going on this, which is George R. R. Martin at his best, with this kind of like 200-year kind of train of thought that almost nobody will have picked up on. It's just us complete nerds who care about that kind of thing. We're about an hour into the live stream, and this is the moment at which I always try my very best to thank my patrons. Patrons, thank you. I say it every week. I mean it every week. I cannot do what I do without your support. So thank you so much. That's why I frame these live streams around questions from you, just as a small way of thanking you. If you do want to support the channel, the best way to do that is through Patreon. There is a link down in the description. Also, thank you to to anyone who's been donating. We're now up to 7,200. Could we get to 7,500 by the end of the stream? That would be pretty amazing. If we can. Thank you so much if you've donated already. It means a huge amount. Thank you. And also, if you are watching this live, could you say thank you to the moderators? They do a fantastic job. They've done an amazing job all the way through both shows that I've covered. It's been quite hard work covering two shows a week, I can tell you from this end, but the moderators have also been doing a lot of hard work. I know some also moderate on other channels too, and the amount of spoilers that happen, the amount of bots coming in to be dropping comments we don't want to see in the chat, and sometimes some just random bits of abuse. They keep the place clean and safe for everyone, and if you're watching this live in the chat, please just show them a bit of love, because they have done an amazing job. Just going through the chat, saying, Sword of the Morning saying, Robert's just confirmed I'm a nerd. Well, yeah, thank you. Yes, you are. If you care about the same things as me, then yes. Regularly scheduled mod love. Yeah, absolutely. Carl Kosnark saying, rats are considered a good critter in many Eastern cultures in real life because they're so clever and resilient and able to thrive in any environment. But also they're evil masters, obviously. Yeah, so we tend to, in sort of in my Western European culture, then rats tend to be, these are people who are blamed for bringing plagues and things like that. So they're never a good thing, and I think that's probably the feel that they are going for with Game of Thrones. Let's go to a question from Howland's little sister. Congratulations to you, Robert, on your 500k subscribers. Yes, thank you very much. If you missed it, I think this is since the last Sunday live stream I did. I hit 500,000 subscribers, so I did a sort of a whole load of thank yous on my Thursday live stream. So I'm not going to go through that again, but I hugely appreciate it. If you've been a part of this journey with me, if you've watched videos, if you've shared, if you've supported in any way, thank you. It's I still can't quite get my head around 500,000 subscribers. That's baffling to me, but thank you. I hugely appreciate it. A lingering question about the last episode of the season of House of the Dragon is, where was Daemon when he sang the song to Vermithor? Was it on Dragonstone or somewhere else? Also, there was a shot of 3 dragons and riders flying over Dragonstone. Lucerys on Arax, Jacaerys on his dragon, but who was on the 3rd dragon? Was that Daemon? Where did he go? So I think these ones I can answer reasonably clearly. This is, in terms of Daemon, where was he when he was singing the song to Vermithor? Yes, this was Dragonstone. This is setting up what we've got coming up next episode. There was a lot of this, actually, incidentally. They've dropped things in there that we talked about the rats already. Maybe I'll get on to talking about the spy war, because that's going to be a thing. But here, him going to Vermithor, singing that song, was very clearly, there's a lot packed into that song that I will probably try to unpick in a video at some point. But clearly, the main thing was he was preparing Vermithor for having another rider. That was the main thing that was there. This is leading up to the Dragon Seeds. So it's the situation strategically the Blacks are in is that although they haven't got many allies on the mainland, in fact, almost none, which is why they sent out Lucerys and Jacaerys to try and get some, they do have a good navy. Now the Velaryons are on side. They've got quite a few dragons, but significantly, they've got a lot of spare dragons as well. And some of these are quite big and impressive. Vermithor, after Vhagar, is the next oldest and biggest dragon there is. And so that's why Daemon was going there, to try and warm up Vermithor. What happens, the Dragon Seeds is just saying, well, okay, if we've got a whole load of dragons out there, there are a whole load of people. Targaryens don't always just kind of stick to their marital vows, do they? There's quite a lot of bastard Targaryens out there. On Dragonstone, they must be all over the place down in that village. So they kind of drag up all of these people who just want to have a go at, maybe they got a bit of Valyrian blood in them somewhere, maybe they could become a dragon rider, and basically this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And for a certain sort of person, it's all or nothing. If you think you can claim a dragon, suddenly you become one of the most powerful people in the land. You get effectively recognized as being related to the Targaryens, and you will get huge wealth and privileges. I think they offered lordships. So this was a big deal. And this is how they thought they could change the game strategically, was that if they got the balance to start with in the war was quite close in terms of dragons, not in terms of dragon numbers, but in terms of size and strength of the dragons that they had there, if they could get those other dragons into action, that would completely shift the balance. So that's what Daemon's doing. It's quite sensible and good strategy for him to be going and doing that. But these dragons are on Dragonstone. The one that might not be, we don't know, is Sea Smoke, who was Laenor's dragon. We don't know where that is. It's currently, that could be on Driftmark, but generally speaking, they're on Dragonstone. The other question about those 3 dragons and riders flying over Dragonstone, the last one was Rhaenys on Melies. Now, the plan they came up with was, again, it was quite a sensible one. It was, I mean, I don't think there were at this point any strategic geniuses who we have to sort of bow down to and say, well, they clearly figured out all of this and they're running all of this. But it was a sensible plan. They needed to get allies. So Jacaerys and Lucerys went off to try and get allies. They then wanted to have a blockade of King's Landing. They could control sea access. They had a big navy. They could control sea access. Daemon would head over onto the mainland, and he was always, Harrenhal, that's the place I need to go. This is the biggest castle. Yes, it's a little bit decrepit, but it's the biggest castle in the most central spot. If you can claim that, then that's a really good base on the mainland. And if you can get the Baratheons covering off anything from the south, and them covering off everything by sea, and Harrenhal would be able to control the main road, the King's Road, coming from the north. Then you're almost surrounding King's Landing. It's just that last road heading, the Rose Road heading off down into the west, into the Reach. So that's the plan. And Rhaenys said, well, I'll go out and I'll just sort of fly Melis around the gullet and just sort of patrol. So that's what she's saying, is that she's there making sure that, or keeping an eye on things that are going on, and making sure that that part of the map is under Team Black's control. So those were the three. Rhaenys just heading off on patrol. Let's go to. I'm going to have a quick flick through the chat. Monkeytron saying, "I'd like to be friends with the cannibal." The cannibal, I think he's misunderstood. The cannibal is a dragon we probably won't see. We might hear rumors of it. We might hear talk of it, but probably won't see. Cannibal is sort of legendary. A grumpy, vicious dragon who lives in a cave on its own on Dragonstone, never bonded with any rider. Anytime anyone goes close, they just get burned, and is called cannibal because apparently it enjoys eating other dragons. So during this period of trying to match up dragons with riders, then yes, a couple of intrepid folks do try, but no, this isn't going to work. So cannibal largely stays out of this story. They can cut cannibal and it's not being a problem. The only time it's possible that cannibal's existence is needed to be known about is a little bit later on in the story. So they might plant the idea that cannibal is there, but we probably won't see cannibal. The thing about that dragon, though, which is intriguing, is that we don't know much about it because people don't go there. And we don't know how old it is. We don't know, and this could be bigger than Vhagar, this dragon. We simply do not know. It could be older than Vhagar, older than Balerion. There was one of the people in Fire and Blood was saying that maybe cannibal was there even before the Targaryens arrived. It's possible. We just do not have the information. So Divine Chelika saying, do you think the cannibal is larger than Balerion? We don't know. My guess is probably not, because I think somebody would have said something if that were the case. Kieran Grant saying, I watched a documentary on ravens and those birds are smarter than Lord Commanders. Complete digression, but yes, so ravens are, in real life, ravens are very clever and they live for a very long time. I discovered, I went to the Tower of London ages ago and had a talk from the raven keeper there. They keep ravens in the Tower of London. If they ever fly off, then the kingdom's doomed or something. And so they clip their wings, obviously, because that's the sensible thing. You know, we don't want these ravens flying off. But they live 40, 50 years, ravens. I was completely unaware of this. And they can learn to speak better than parrots or any of the other birds that you think of as mimicking. In fact, I heard one who was like happily chattering away, and it was very clear, and English people will probably get this reference more, but he had a Geordie accent, this raven, and he had a Geordie accent because the raven keeper was a Geordie. He came from Newcastle, and that's how good they are at mimicking things. So yes, ravens are astonishing creatures. Chido, sorry, I just say Chido Azugba saying, great job you're doing, thank you. What were the chances of Alicent's kids having black hair because of her? So this is an interesting one with hair colors. George R. R. Martin uses hair colors less as a let's be realistic about how it is, and more as a driver of the narrative. And if you had to critique him on anything, I think this is probably one of the higher things that you would have on that list, is that he uses hair color all the time. Obviously, this was a big thing about Joffrey and Myrcella and Tommen's hair color, and Ned had that big book of hair colors, and we get to see, all of the Baratheons have this sort of hair color, and the Starks are supposed to have this sort of hair color, and the Targaryens have this sort of hair color, and the Strongs having the different hair color shows their parentage, and it's often just which is which. The hair color someone has is as much to do with what is useful for the narrative arc rather than anything else. As I say, it's just a trope that George R. R. Martin uses for himself. So let's go to a question from Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola. I'm thinking of how in House of the Dragon, Aemond killing Lucerys was really more that none of them were able to control their dragons. Can you think of any other events in A Song of Ice and Fire world where this may be the case? Events where dragons were involved, but what really happened could have been more of an accident than a deliberate attack by a dragon rider." Thanks. Yeah, so this is really interesting because for me, this is one of 2 or 3 shifts that we've had in our understanding of this world that have implications across for the main story as well. Because this is the kind of thing, we know Ryan Condal was literally in daily contact with George R. R. Martin, and every time he wanted to make a change to something that was part of Game of Thrones lore, A Song of Ice and Fire lore, he would definitely be talking to George R. R. Martin. Also, part of that writing team for season 1 was T. McKell, who was a long-time assistant to George R. R. Martin and knows this lore back to front. So she was hugely involved in this too. So this about the dragons not being under control is, I think, significant. And it's not just this one thing here. This is also a matter of something that Viserys said early on. I can't remember exactly which episode, but it felt incongruous at the time. It's the kind of thing Targaryens never say. He said that dragons are a force too great, and I'm paraphrasing, but Targaryen, we cannot control them. Maybe we should never have tried. Valyrians should never have tried. And it's like, what? Not just a random Targaryen saying this is the king saying this. And then they moved on, and so we kind of like left it as like, oh, this is just maybe him pondering things in his own mind. But this shows what he meant, is that neither of those 2 dragon riders were in control of their dragon during that time. If this was just Vhagar, then perhaps we could understand it. Vhagar is quite an old and grumpy dragon, and Aemond, he's not hugely experienced, so maybe we could understand that. But this is both of the dragons went against what their riders wanted. So this is a theme. Now, I do wonder whether, if we scroll back to Viserys, his thoughts on the subject came from the fact that he was the last rider of Balerion. Now, Balerion, the Black Dread, must have been one of the most unmanageable dragons to ride. We know that before him we have Arya Targaryen, who, this was in Jaehaerys I's reign, climbed on top of Balerion trying to claim it, and it flew all the way off to Valyria. Horrific things happened, and then flew back, and that was clearly never under control of Arya Targaryen. When Viserys was the rider of Balerion, it was only for a very short period of time. I do wonder whether he experienced some degree of lack of control of Balerion as well, and that was what led to his belief that we cannot control these dragons. So that is really interesting. So we've got Viserys, who knows a lot about the lore and history of Valyrians, thinking, well, we can't control the dragons. Now we have two examples clearly here of Targaryens not being able to control their dragons. We've got that Arya example also of not being able to control a dragon. We've got Daenerys in the books in a dance, pardon me, in a Dance with Dragons, where she cannot control Drogon, and Drogon flies off into the middle of the Dothraki Sea. We now have got so many examples of Targaryens not being able to control dragons. This is surely something which George R. R. Martin has okayed, and this will have potential impacts for the book series. Now, I spoke, I think it was on Thursday, about the possibility, just a possibility, that what we will have in the culmination of A Song of Ice and Fire is something close to what we had in the culmination of Game of Thrones, season 8, with Dany over King's Landing, but it's more a matter of she can't control Drogon. That's now a possibility that wasn't there before. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but that I think now has to be added into the possibilities of what might happen. We'll just have to wait and see where we go with that storyline. Now, you were asking whether there are any other examples of when this might have happened. I think I'm just looking back, and I think, broadly speaking, the first times that we read about the Dragon Riders, obviously in any detail, is Aegon's invasion. I think everything that they do kind of chimes with what they were trying to do. So we get the melting of Harrenhal. That actually seems to chime with what Aegon had said he was going to do. The burning over Dorne seems to have happened again and again and was intentional. The Field of Fire seems to have been intentional. So there's nothing there really that feels not intentional. But the Dance of the Dragons does offer up a few more possibilities of maybe we need to look at some battles in a slightly different way. The Battle of Rook's Rest is going to be quite significant because we've already discovered that Aemond can't necessarily control Vhagar. Do we think Aegon is going to... We've not even really seen Aegon riding Sunfire. Do you think he'll be able to control his dragon? Possibly not. Rhaenys, we might think, would be able to control Meleys, but if we've got two potentially out of control dragons, maybe they did not actually want to take down Rhaenys. So that's one possibility. We've also got Jacaerys when he goes into battle. Will he be able to control it completely? I don't know. And then we get Tumbleton, a couple of Tumbleton moments when you just think these are just dragons attacking each other. Is this... other people in control? We've got literal children on backs of dragons now. Daeron is a child, so is he going to have control over Tessarion? I don't know. One would hope, but I think we will see at least one more example in House of the Dragon of a dragon being out of control, and perhaps Vhagar again is going to be the one that does it, or perhaps it's going to be one of the younger riders not being in control of their dragon. Let's go through the chat. All the artsy saying both of those examples, Dany and Arya, were not properly bonded to the dragons mentioned. Aemond and Lucerys are supposed to be bonded to theirs. No. Well, I mean, I think Dany is bonded to Drogon. I don't think that there's much doubt there. She's known him. I mean, she is literally the mother of those dragons, and I think that she is didn't go through some kind of bonding ceremony, but I think that that is her dragon. And in terms of area, then not properly bonded, yes, I think I would probably agree with that. But I think it shows that you can't just jump on top of a dragon and be in control of it in any way, shape, or form. So it's the... I think we could debate around the edges of this, but I think the pattern that George R. R. Martin has created here is quite clear and strong. The Targaryens do not necessarily have control over the dragons, even if they are bonded to them. It's definitely more the case when they're not bonded to them. Philip LC saying, in the Rook's Rest scene, will Rhaenys say, "I spared you, why are you ambushing me?" Yeah, I think that's the big shift we've got going on there, is that so Rhaenys did spare Aegon and Aemon. She could have killed them, and if they're coming for her, then maybe they decide they want to spare her, but the dragons won't allow it. Well, I don't know. It's going to be absolutely fascinating how that one plays out. Andrew K saying, Dany has no dragon trainers or anyone with experience to guide her or help train bond with dragons, and hers are the first ones in over a century. Much more difficult situation. Yeah, absolutely. So as I say, what I'm not saying is that each of these is like they've got this strong bond there and this gets broken. It's a thread that George R. R. Martin is clearly trying to draw for us, that dragons are not as controllable as perhaps some of us were thinking before. Udelbug saying, I think Dany's burning of the Carls could be a situation where she doesn't control her dragons. She doesn't seem like a mass murderer, but it could lead to her to be darker. Well, yeah, I mean, my own working theory on that, I don't want to get distracted too far down the Dany path here, but my take on the burning of the Carls is that we get, if you go back to the House of the Undying and you get those words of prophecy, always dangerous trusting words of prophecy, but the one of the intriguing ones is 3 fires you will light. Now, what we know with Dany, obviously she will light lots of fires with her dragons, and she has already in the books with her dragons, but her personally lighting a fire is, she's done one, which is the funeral pyre for Khal Drogo, and the way they did it on the show was that it was her personally burning down Vaes Dothrak, the base of the Dosh Khaleen. And I think that might be important, is that this is her personally lighting that fire because she has to light 3 fires. So that's my gut instinct on that one. But yeah, maybe she could. Let's go to a question from Diego Godoy saying, on the newly released Rise of the Dragon book, Harry Lloyd did the audiobook. Do you think he could also be doing the narration of The Winds of Winter when it comes out too? For me, it'd be a dream come true, as he did such a good job, and Duncan Egg, it's unbelievable. So, yeah, for those who don't know, there is a new book, George R. R. Martin book, Rise of the Dragon, out. I've not really talked about it for a couple of reasons. One reason is that this isn't new George R. R. Martin material. This is a condensed version of Fire and Blood. So if you're looking for new George R. R. Martin material, if you want to read the story of the House of the Dragon, then Fire and Blood is the book to go to rather than that. There's also, I'm not going to go into detail on this, please do your own research there. One of the co-writers there, there is some, let's say, controversy around her and her views that she has expressed on Twitter and elsewhere over a long period of time. Feel free to do your own research on that. But one thing I will say, purely in terms of the artwork looks amazing. And indeed, one of the, I don't think I've seen him in the chat today, but he's often in the chat here. Ertach, Altanos who is a fantastic artist, did the front cover for that and quite a few of the illustrations inside as well. I hugely want to support him and what he has done. In fact, I will, after this, over on Twitter, I will link to a few of his pictures because they're absolutely amazing. And the artwork as a whole, I love to support artists, particularly artists who have come up through the community here. That there are some amazing artists who do amazing artwork. People like Magali Villeneuve, who I'm a huge fan of, Mark Simonetti as well, another massive fan. But I've got a complete soft spot for people who are fans of the show, fans of the books, and have been producing excellent art and are starting to get recognized for what they do, having come up through the community. So if you can support Urtach in this in some way, then please do, because he's an excellent bloke as well. Let's go to a question from Creative Branches saying, congrats on 500k. Thank you very much. Oh, actually, before I get onto that one, Diego Godoy, just finishing off there, talking about Harry Lloyd. Yes, he did Dunk and Egg. I've said this before. I'll say this every time this comes up. Harry Lloyd's audio narration of the Dunk and Egg stories, if you've never listened to them, for me, is the best marriage of a narrator to a story that I've yet heard. He does an exceptional job on that. So yes, personally, I think he is my top pick for when The Winds of Winter does come out. Because Roy Dotrice, who did narrate the first 5 books, sadly passed away a couple of years ago. So there will be a vacancy there. I think the thing I would say is that this should be an actor who does this. This is just my take on this. As somebody who does various bits of audio narration, if you don't know, I've got a second channel on audio narration channel called The Well Told Tale. Do go and check that out. I try to do audio narrations of the best science fiction and fantasy stories ever written, the absolute classics, Conan stories, the War of the Worlds, Call of Cthulhu, that kind of thing. If you want that, I will always produce those 100% free for people over on this as a podcast, but also a YouTube channel. But I can say from that experience that what this needs, what the Winds of Winter will need, is an actual professional actor, because there are so many characters, a ridiculous amount of characters that George R.R. Martin has. And one of the things that Roy Dotrice brings to that audio narration is that he tries to give each character their own voice, which is something that I think it requires a great acting job, not just a narration job, but a great acting job as well. So my favorite for that is indeed Harry Lloyd, but who knows when that will come along anyway. But Creative Branches saying, we'll be seeing a lot of new locations next season, and I'm worried that we will get the season 7 and 8 version of Travel, Game of Thrones season 7 and 8 version of Travel, the video game fast travel that makes the world feel small. Do you think we will see Jace stop at White Harbor? And if we get scenes of Jace in the north before he gets to Winterfell, where might he stop? What may happen to him? Right, so this is... I think really interesting, sort of, first of all, that point about the fast travel. One of the things which worked best about the early season, in my view, the early season of Game of Thrones, is that they showed travel scenes, and that gave you a sense of the scale of Westeros. It took a couple of episodes for them to get down from Winterfell all the way down to King's Landing. It took time to get from one place to another. We have Arya roaming the Riverlands for a couple of seasons. The Hound doing the same. Brienne's seemed to be constantly going off on these mini missions, looking for various people. And that travel was a really important part of how well the story worked, because it grounded us as well in the real world, not just like, we're here in a castle, we're here in another castle, we're here in a palace, we're over an hour in another castle, actually seeing the world in between. The Jace's travels here do give us a bit of an opportunity. He does, because he's on Dragonback, obviously he does sort of like drop in on just like big and important places rather than actually traveling on the ground, but it does allow us perhaps the opportunity to widen this world a little bit. He should, in the book, he makes 3 stops before Winterfell. The first stop is at the Eyrie. Now, I think they will show this. He goes to see Jane Arryn, who is currently the Lady of the Vale, and he negotiates with her. And so she's related. Emma Arryn was obviously Viserys' wife, so they're related in. Rhaenyra thought that she could rely on Jane Arryn, and also obviously the fact that she is a female ruler probably makes her fundamentally predisposed to be supportive of Rhaenyra. Now, what Jane Arryn negotiated was, okay, I'll support you, but I'm just a little bit scared of people coming to attack me. I need a dragon here to be defending the Eyrie. So that's what was agreed. Joffrey, the littlest of the strong boys, gets sent over there with his dragon, and he takes with her Rhaena. He takes with him Rhaena Velaryon. That's Lena and Daemon's daughter, and she brings with her 3 dragon eggs. Now, what this means is those 2 are out of most of the war. They will have a role a little bit later, but that's what the cunning plan is. And it also provides a place for another dragon to be born, hatched. So that's going to be quite important. I think they will show us that. Then he stops off at the 3 Sisters. Now, the 3 Sisters is, if you imagine that bit of water, the Bight, which is there between the Vale and the north, that's where the 3 Sisters are. They play a small role at points in the story elsewhere. Ned gets shipwrecked there during Robert's Rebellion at the very beginning of it, when he's trying to get his way back up to the north from the Vale. He gets shipwrecked there. Also, Davos goes there during the while he's on his travels in A Song of Ice and Fire. So they have a small role, but then obviously they're not. These aren't hugely important houses, but clearly Jace decided just to stop off there and got their support. Then he went to White Harbour to House Manderley. House Manderley, they did mention House Manderley on the show with, well, are the Manderleys going to support us? I wonder they might skip that. They might just sort of reference it, saying, oh yeah, Jace saying, yes, I went to House Manderley and this is what I agreed with them. They may well not show us that because it's not hugely significant. He did make a promise to them. He said that he would marry, or Joffrey, the youngest brother, would marry one of Lord Manderley's daughters. So this was like they get something out of it. The Manderleys, just to remind you, are, yes, House Stark are obviously the most powerful house in the north, but the Manderleys are the richest house in the north. And they also have the North's, not their only fleet, but certainly the most significant fleet. So they are the other house. If you wanted to get one other house in the North to support you, then it would be House Manderley. So that's why he stopped off there. Then he ends up going to Winterfell. So will we see travel? I think we'll see more travel when we actually get to the armies on the move. That's when we'll see the real world as they're sort of going through. We'll see a lot of the Riverlands again. All of the big wars in Westeros end up with big battles in the Riverlands. So we will see the world that way. With Jace's travels, it's more, I'm on a dragon and I shall drop off here, and then I shall fly away and I shall drop off here. That's more what he was up to. Let's Sword of the Morning saying, I still keep hearing George R. Martin talking of Dawn. He must have a point for that sword. Yeah, absolutely. This isn't the stream to be speculating about the role of the sword Dawn, but yes, it's hugely important. James Braheny saying the difference in House of the Dragon is more characters have dragons, so travel is quicker. Yeah, so basically the war will be fought on two levels, with the dragons and also with the armies, and we will see the world through the armies, but also we're going to be seeing a lot of it flying with the dragons. Catherine Furseth says, hi Robert, what I'm excited most about going forward is getting to see what happens between the Starks and the Targaryens when Jace visits Winterfell. How do you expect this will play out? How much new information on the relationship do you think we will get? And Mara Lee's also saying, we know that Jace will visit Winterfell next season. Do you think we will get to see the crypts of Winterfell and the Wall as well? What secrets, history and lore do you hope will be revealed? So this is, I have to say, also one of the things I'm most looking forward to in season 2. Jace will go to the north. He will, in the books anyway, he will strike a deal with Cregan Stark. They will get on. The two of them will become good friends, and he will strike a deal which becomes known as the Pact of Ice and Fire. Jace is obviously the heir to Rhaenyra, and he says that he will marry his eldest daughter to Cregan's eldest son. So the two families will be joined, and that is bringing the Starks into the royal family. So this is quite a significant thing. Now, we also get other stories. What happened while he was up there? We get Sarah Snow, who is this alleged bastard, Stark bastard, who apparently he falls in love with. Maybe he marries in secret in front of a weirwood tree. Maybe has children with her. Maybe his dragon lays some eggs down in Winterfell crypts. Lots of different stories. They will show us, this will be an episode worth, I'm sure, of what goes on in Winterfell. They will want to show us this. What might we learn? I think they will not be able to resist the prophetic echoing of what we've learnt about Aegon's prophecy, the Song of Ice and Fire, which explicitly talks about the threat from the north, and the Stark's role, the Stark's ongoing role of protecting the north. The north remembers. Now, the nuance here is that we didn't see, I thought this would happen, but we didn't see Rhaenyra tell Jace about the prophecy. I'd assumed that she probably would, because he's now her heir, and this seems to be the way that the Targaryens doing it, just passing it down from heir to heir, but we didn't see that. Now, that makes it slightly harder for those conversations to come up, because Jace isn't there actively looking for any of this, which means that I suspect he's probably not going to take time to go to the Wall, because he thinks that all he's doing right now is on a diplomatic mission trying to get help from people, and the Wall, the Night's Watch, are politically neutral. There's no benefit there. The moment he's gone to Winterfell, he might as well just head straight back home. So if he hasn't been told this, then no, I don't think he's going to the Wall. Going down to the crypts would be fun. I can't see a reason why they would go down there unless they're talking about the past. I mean, this is the kind of thing where you go, could we see some really deep down things in the crypts? Where might they take this? I don't know. And I think that's probably the thing that I find most fascinating, is that they could just have him go up there, meet Cregan Stark, get on with him, sign an agreement and leave. Or they could make it one of the most lore mind-blowing things possible by having the Starks remembering and actually the North forgets much later on. It's possible. It's possible that they go down that route. So I genuinely don't know what we're going to see there. But what I hope is that we will get more than just Jace and Cregan. I hope we will get some hints of the threat from the North, because they've introduced this, and this is the furthest north we're going to go in this show. Having introduced this issue, they must show something. Bill Volk saying cutting Mushroom from the show is unforgivable. They showed us for like a second a character that apparently was Mushroom. Is that unforgivable? I mean, Mushroom is one of the sources of Fire and Blood. He's not a main character within the story itself. So as much as Mushroom tried to write himself into a few of those stories, it's clear that he wasn't the center of all this. So I'm actually okay. I really wanted to see Mushroom. I wish that we get more of him. We may get more of him, but I'm quite glad that he's not the center of it. And this is perhaps because of the way they've pitched it. We talked a little bit earlier about the way that this is quite a dark story. It's quite a tragic story. It's not a funny story much. There are a couple of moments of levity, but generally speaking, it's not funny. And if we had Mushroom in, being the Mushroom that we love from the books, that would actually alter the feel and dynamic of this. So, I mean, heresy as it is, I'm okay with Mushroom not being in it. I really wanted him beforehand. I was one of the cheerleaders of the Where is Mushroom fan club, but I think having seen season 1, I think it would just be a little bit jarring. I'm happy with just a few more cameos of him just in the background somewhere. I think so. For example, there's one moment when he claims he hid in a barrel of flour to escape detection. I would love just to have that in the background, just as a little Easter egg for us book fans. Just this, some guards go by or something, and then you just see in the background like the top of a barrel lift up and a face look out. That kind of thing I would love. But as a central character, I'm all right. Jason DiMaggio saying, how can Sea Smoke be a claimable dragon when Laenor is alive in the show? Retcon of how dragons work, or did he just die off screen? Damon specifically says Sea Smoke is unclaimed. Well, Damon has to. In show, he has to stick by this narrative that Laenor is dead. So, of course, he will say that. And he seems to be the kind of person who will accept a few people trying to claim Sea Smoke and failing as the price of keeping that secret. And also you were asking why they cut Diren from the season entirely. I think I kind of understand all of that because they had a lot of characters to introduce, and in particular, and this is something actually Whitney question here, I'll link this in here. Whitney's asking who my favorite character was. Personally loved the chaotic Daemon we saw in episode 1 and loved adult Aemond bringing the same energy. But I really wish that Diren at least had a mention during the first season, and I wish adult Baela and Rhaena had more speaking parts. So yes, there were a few characters that I wish we'd had more from. Lena, I think it was tragic we missed out on more from her. She's a great character, and I would have loved to see more. And I think we had a few great deleted scenes of her as well that hopefully at some point we get to see. But Diren plus the two daughters, Baela and Rhaena, they didn't get much going on there. Joffrey, the youngest of the Strongs, we didn't really get much going on. Diren, as I say, wasn't even in it. I I am sympathetic with this because they had to introduce a lot of characters, a lot of Targaryens, a lot of them with very similar sounding names, and they didn't want to lose the audience. So they had to limit who we were going to see. Now, in the Dance of the Dragons, it's I'm laughing because I'm just trying to work out the way to say this politely. Targaryens die at quite a rate, which means that we can introduce these other Targaryens and keep the same level of Targaryen in the show for a while. So I think what we will probably find is that Daeron will be introduced in the second season, but by that point we've already lost one person. We will have lost a couple more already. So I don't mind this. I think it works okay. As long as those characters do appear properly when they're supposed to appear. Daeron doesn't actually have much to do at this point in the story. Similarly, Baelor and Rhaena, they yes, they're there, but they're not as significant characters. They will become more significant, but not yet. Just having a quick flick through the chat. Not quite sure. So Lucian saying, I'm excited about the show. Love Guillermo del Toro. I don't know which show that is you're talking about. Shanghai Chica saying, will they explain what is meant by there must always be a Stark in Winterfell? Well, that's the kind of thing that I hope they might. So there must always be a Stark in Winterfell. I take at the moment as having two reasons. One is probably connected in with the fact that Winterfell is magically Stark. And this is when they talk about the crypts feeling like, you know, the Starks always think this is our place. This is because clearly what has happened is that this is when Winterfell was established, it was the weirwood tree and the crypts, maybe with a tower above. That's it. What we think of a Winterfell as being the castle, that came later in lots of different iterations over millennia. What actually is Winterfell is the crypts and the weirwood tree. So when we're hearing there must always be a Stark in Winterfell, it is connected in with that. And if you buy in with my theory that the reason why we've got the crypts is because the Starks, the dead Starks, are going to rise, perhaps the statues of the Starks will rise to fight against the others when they come, and they have to be aroused in some way. Aroused is one way of saying that, but you know what I mean. They have to be awoken in some way. Then it will have to be a Stark who does that. And so that is why there must always be a Stark in Winterfell. But that, as with all of these kind of things, over time, the practical side of this also plays in. And there must always be a Stark in Winterfell is also the kind of thing which is good for the Stark image, is that as long as people know that there's this line, they will go, well, of course the Starks have a right to rule, there must always be a Stark, and people start to believe that there must always be a Stark in Winterfell, then you can't ever depose the Starks, because if you think that there's something important there, so this becomes politically important to the Starks as well. But if they describe something else in addition to that, that would be amazing. Let's go with a question from Emma Scheiman saying, hi, Robert. I was disappointed that baby Visenya didn't have more draconic features. It seems like the show was gearing up to show us a Targaryen dragon baby with the intercuts of Syrax and Rhaenyra during her labor. The baby was only on screen for a moment, so it's possible I missed some scaliness, but I was expecting her to have wings or a tail. It also didn't seem like Rhaenyra blamed the Greens for the loss of a baby as she did in Fire and Blood. It felt like Visenya's death, that's the baby's name, was somewhat sidelined to make Lucerys' more impactful. But in the book, losing Visenya is a big part of Rhaenyra's shift towards war. What did you think of these changes? So Yeah, in terms of was the baby draconic, we weren't shown, is the honest answer, and I think that was deliberate. And I think this is another one of those things that they did, which I quite liked. It was like the feel when back in episode 1 or whenever it was, when you had Daemon there after the death of Viserys' son, and he's there somewhere down in Flea Bottom, and he's being encouraged to make a toast, and you see that he's making a toast to, or about to make a toast to, the heir for a day, but we don't actually see it. And so we, the audience, are left to draw our own conclusions as to how he said that. Was it with honor in his voice? Was it mocking? I mean, the more we've seen of Daemon, I think going back, we probably now think he was not mocking him. That Daemon had so much love for his brother, it feels quite hard to imagine that he would have been mocking the death of his brother's son with show Daemon. This is so that feel where we, the audience, are left to make that decision. That is, I think, what they were doing here with the Rhaenyra's baby. We're not shown fully. We're shown the reactions of some of the midwives and also the Silent Sisters, who are just like, what's going on there? But that doesn't tell us the whole story, I don't think. Certainly the birth, the whole thing was tragic, clearly, and horrible. But I think they wanted to leave us with the idea that maybe this was in some way a draconic baby, but they're not so obvious. So I think that's what they did, and I think I liked that, leaving it slightly vague. In terms of the impact on Rhaenyra, this was the victim, again, I've talked about this before, of the squashing events together to try and, within one episode, to tell the story in such a way that sort of creates a good episode. Now that here was, I mean, these events did all happen relatively swiftly, one after another, but they had the birth and then Lucerys's death, and then her hearing about it, all in one episode. So the birth, her mourning that birth, then her one of her sons dies, and then her mourning that, in a way, all squashed together. Now, in the same way that I think they made a decision, for example, they deleted the scene of Lena claiming Vhagar because they didn't want to distract away from the scene of Aemond claiming Vhagar, which would have been probably the next episode or a couple of episodes later. That I think is the same reason why they did what they did here. They did not want to concentrate too much on that because they wanted the biggest impact to be that last moment. And this is something Ryan Condal said, and if you kind of work the logic back from this, it kind of makes a lot of sense, I think, is that he had a very clear idea about the end of that episode, in that he wrote that his direction was Rhaenyra turns around and war is in her eyes. And so that's what he wanted. He wanted the end of the season to be the moment that Rhaenyra decides that's it, it's war. And that has to be the culmination of all of that has to be her learning about the death of Lucerys, which means that, yes, the tragic loss of her baby, stillborn baby, impacted on her, but they had to make the bigger impact the second one. So this was done for dramatic reasons, for adapting from page to screen. I understand it. Yes, it missed a bit of the nuance, therefore, of what was going on. It missed a lot of the psychology of what was going on in her head at the time. And also, you referenced it a little bit there about the relationship between Alicent and Rhaenyra and who she blames. Now, it would be really fascinating to see where they go with this in season 2, because one of the big shifts they made was establishing this clear and strong friendship between the two of them to start with. Now, in the book, that wasn't like that because they were different in ages. When Alicent married Viserys, she was about 18 and Rhaenyra was about 9. So the relationship between the two of them wasn't besties hanging out under the weirwood tree, gossiping and chatting through the history of Westeros. This was very different. This was a new stepmom. That's the feel that they had. And so they didn't have that strong friendship bond to start with. And that they played all the way through to at the end, the last couple of episodes. This was the two people who were actively trying to stop there being a war were Alicent and Rhaenyra, because they didn't want to go to war with each other. This was Rhaenyra stopping the assassination. Otto, her father, wanted assassins to go and kill Rhaenyra, and she was saying, no, we're not doing it that way. We're going to offer her peace terms. And Rhaenyra was there when she's clearly going through agony, and she's saying, nobody declares war without me. And that is her just saying, okay, we're holding off now. And she, even when she gets the peace terms that Otto delivers, they're clearly from Alicent. She doesn't just reject them. She says, I'm going to think about this. So those two, the bond between those two characters has shifted hugely from where it was in the book. I like it. I have to say, I think this was a good shift. It makes for a slightly different story. But as we've got from George R. R. Martin, when Aziz and Cher, History of Westeros, did that great interview. If you've not seen it, by the way, go over to History of Westeros and have a look at their interview with George R. R. Martin. Fantastic stuff. Through that, he clarified that in his mind, very clearly, there's now 2 canons. There's book canon and show canon. And these are different things. So he wants the two to be as close together as possible, but he's no longer trying to pretend that they are in any way the same thing. He kind of shifted away from that at some point in the second half of Game of Thrones, but he's now said it explicitly that they are different. So show canon is going to be different. The story we get on the show is going to be different from the story that we get in the books. Let's just quickly flicking through the chat. Reflective Lambling saying that I'd say half and half. I think Otto stole those pages, and I don't believe a word Otto says. He's playing his own game. So yeah, so the page that was Otto handed over the page from the book that way back in episode 1 they were reading together. This was the book, The History of Nymeria and Invasion of Dawn, and the idea being that he handed it over so she would know this was from Rhaenyra would know that this offer was from Alicent. And Reflective Rambling was saying, or perhaps this was actually just Otto playing a game and he was trying to sweet talk or persuade Rhaenyra to accept those terms by pretending this came from Alicent. I don't put it past Otto, but at the same time, we have to understand what's the game here. If he's doing that, he gets Rhaenyra to accept. That's not what he was wanting before. And if he has now fully given in to Alicent's lead in this, then why would she be still trying to play around and go behind her back in some way? So I think I wouldn't put it past Otto, but I think it seems most likely this did come from Alicent, because these were the terms basically that she was trying to suggest. Aegon Dragonborn saying, I would like to know if the dragon disobedience may have played a role in the Doom of Valyria. It would definitely make sense thematically. Fire is equally untamable and dangerous as ice. Yes, it is. I mean, I don't think we've got the evidence for saying that yet, that the lack of control over this was what caused the Doom of Valyria. I mean, I did a video ages ago. I still hold by it, I think, mostly at least. A theory video about what caused the Doom of Valyria, which is a bit too long and complicated to explain here. But basically, we've already had the Faceless Men basically have said that they were responsible, but then you need to ask who hired the Faceless Men. I think we've got some prime suspects in that, and we've got quite a good reason why this might have happened that is not to do with losing control of dragons. But hey, maybe now the world has shifted in terms of our understanding of the Valyrians' control over dragons and fire, so perhaps we need to look at it a new way. Reflective Rambling just saying clarification, I believe Alicent does want peace, but I'm not sure that the terms were hers. Okay, I think that's fair enough. I mean, I think that the terms of they all survive does seem to come from Alicent, because Otto seemed to want to kill her and seemed to think that was the sensible idea. So if there's a sort of a mixing here, it's, I think he now has decided that the best way forward is to go with Alicent's plan, but hey, at the back of his mind, maybe he still thinks that he should kill them and probably will. Question from Lahiru Dina Lankara saying, good evening, Robert. Congratulations on 500k subscribers. Thank you. And praise be to our mods. Yes, praise be to the mods. You're doing excellent as always. Do you think dragons change their gender depending on the rider? Do they mate at all? Do dragons lay eggs when two dragon riders marry or get together? In the show, Syrax lays eggs after Daemon and Rhaenyra get together. And if the riders love each other, do they imprint it on the dragons? Silverwing and Vermithor are said to have some sort of bond seen at the end after the second battle of Tumbleton. So yeah, a lot of questions, and a lot of questions that we don't have a definitive answer to. Picking up on the last one in terms of the relationship, whether the relationship between two riders impacts on the relationship between the dragons, we definitely have that, as you've already talked about Vermithor and Silverwing. So Vermithor and Silverwing were the dragons for King Jaehaerys and his Queen Alicent, who they reigned together for decades. So they had a very long, unbroken bond with their dragons and with each other. And despite a couple of what the historians called the quarrels, when they split apart for a couple of years, apart from that, they seem to clearly very, very strongly love each other and have a very, very strong bond, those two. Now, that then gets reflected firstly in the fact that apparently those two dragons, long afterwards, during the time of Fire and Blood, before we get to the new riders for them, they used to sort of curl together in Dragonstone. And then, yes, at the very end of all of this, Vermithor dies and Silverwing seems to be inconsolable, just like sort of pushing the dead body. What really? And then just flying off and just sitting on an island on her own. So it's really quite sad. So is there some element of that? Yes. The intriguing thing is that how might this play into the story? Intriguing for me anyway. So because we do have an example of a couple of dragons who were ridden by a married couple and now are on opposite sides of the war. being Caraxes and Vhagar. Caraxes is Daemon's dragon. Vhagar was ridden by Helaena, his wife, and now is ridden by Aemond. So there are many layers here, and before all of this, Vhagar was ridden by Daemon's dad. So the link across to Daemon is very strong. Many layers. We've already established that the way that Aemond looks up to Daemon and tries to, in many ways, mimic him. Does that somehow come from his link with Vhagar, who has known Daemon all the way through in a couple of different loving relationships? It's hard to think that it doesn't play some role in there. But then also, when we get to the end of their story, we have Daemon and Aemond facing each other on their dragons, and these were the two dragons that used to fly together with a married couple on top of them. How is that going to work? Are they really going to want to attack each other? I don't know. This is one of those things that it's not really mentioned at all in Fire and Blood. You just have to go, well, hang on a moment. Those dragons have got history. And yet they do seem to fight each other, and they do seem effectively to kill each other. So we'll have to wait and see. There's scope for doing things there. In that, I mean, it's going to be an amazing scene when it happens, but there's scope for doing things to show extra layers of what's going on there. In terms of, do dragons change their sex? Do they... or gender? Do they mate at all? What about laying eggs? We don't know this information. What we do have is a book from Septon Bath, who was the right-hand man and best friend of King Jaehaerys, who wrote this great book called Unnatural History about dragons that comes up with all of these fantastic theories. That's probably basically one of the things about Septon Bath is that he seems more often than not to be right about stuff, and he definitely thinks that dragons do change according to their rider and maybe some other things in terms of their gender. So that's probably right, but we don't know, and the maesters all poo-poo this idea. So no, this is all just it's heretical stuff there from Septon Bath, and that book was even put on the banned list, and so many years later it gets burned. Still probably a copy or two is left in the Citadel, but that's pretty much it. We still have a lot more dragon lore to be learning, and I think if we do get House of the Dragon going way back in time to something like the invasion, Aegon's invasion, they will have so much more knowledge about dragons. That's when we will learn a lot more about dragon lore, because even here they seem to have lost quite a lot. Let's go to I'm just flicking through the chat here. Andrew K saying, I think that highlights somewhat sinister nature, or certainly at least something off with Dragon Bonds. We see abrupt loyalty shifts with new riders that overrides familiarity. Yes, we do see these abrupt shifts, but we haven't yet seen how that would on show. In the show, we haven't seen how that works, which is why I'm so fascinated by this Vhagar and how willing Vhagar is to be fighting other dragons. Particularly, and we talked this Battle of Rook's Rest again. We've talked about it a few times how this might work, but Vhagar coming up against Meleys, Rhaenys's dragon. I mean, how's that going to work? Because Helaena was Rhaenys's daughter. So is Vhagar really going to be wanting to attack Rhaenys? It's not. I mean, it's not clear. This is the kind of thing the show will have to start making some decisions on, and it will impact on how the dragons work and operate. They always were going to. This isn't just a thing that they've decided to do. The minute you've got this many dragons and you make the decision, we're going to try and make these dragons have their own personalities, you have to start addressing these questions. So far, I'm very happy with what they've done. Let's see where we go after this. Aegon Dragonborn saying, George R. R. Martin said he would start House of the Dragon 40 years before the first episode. The seeds of the Dance of the Dragons is clearly generations old. Yeah, so we started, House of the Dragon started 28 years before the Dance of the Dragons. What they did was they squashed a bit. I mean, I'm okay with what they did. Basically, at the Great Council of 101 at Harrenhal, which we saw in that opening scene, they kind of squished together the succession crisis which happened then with a succession crisis which happened a little bit before, when Jaehaerys and Alicent had their quarrel about whether or not Rhaenys should be the heir. So they kind of squashed that in with what happened in 101. And for the sake of keeping a clear narrative for non-book readers, which is the majority of people who are going to be watching the show, I think I was okay with that. So I think that's what George R. R. Martin was probably referring to. And Lahadu also was saying, a question for everyone: if we ran polls during later seasons, would we see a drastic change in how many still love the Blacks, or will there be reductions or changes after each season? I mean, I'll throw this one out to the chat. Do you think we will shift sides during this in who has our sympathies, from black to green and vice versa? Or do you think that this is going to be like in the book? Quite clearly, most people came out from reading the book thinking, well, the Blacks were in the right and they weren't perfect people. In fact, they did a whole load of bad and wrong things, but they were still in the right. Do you think people will still have that in the show? Mara Lee saying, how do you think they will begin and end the next season? Will we see blood and cheese in the first episode? And what battle or battles will we see leading to the Dance of the Dragons before the end of the second season? Well, I think once we get into next season, we are in the Dance of the Dragons. I think that's pretty much where we're at now. The Rhaenyra turning around with a war in her eyes is that. Will we start with Blood and Cheese? Well, I think Blood and Cheese will be in episode 1. I'm pretty sure of that. Where they take this up to, I think, is the fall of King's Landing, where we start this with the Greens sort of in the ascendancy. They have King's Landing. They have the Treasury. They have all of the trappings of power, Blackfire, the coronation. They have a bit of an advantage in timing. They've gone to the Baratheons, and they seem to have got support of the Baratheons. Certainly prevented the Baratheons from supporting Rhaenyra. And they've got the Lannisters, the Hightowers. They seem to be in a reasonably strong position. Where I think season 2 is going to go is from that to the position where suddenly Team Black are in the ascendancy. There are strategic errors by the Greens which lead to King's Landing being defenseless, and the Blacks can come and swoop in. So that, I think, is where we're going to be ending this. That means what we're going to be having is, yes, we'll have Blood and Cheese, we'll have the Battle of Rook's Rest, we'll have a whole load of stuff going on in the Riverlands, we'll have Daemon going over to Harrenhal, we'll have Jace doing his journeying all the way up to Winterfell and back, and we should see the start of the armies marching. We should see an army starting to march out from the from the southwest. This is where we're going to see Daeron on Tessarion. His dragon should be coming up from the southwest from Old Town, and we should start seeing the armies move in the Riverlands. So that's roughly what we're going to see, and the Dragon Seeds whole storyline along with that, which will connect in with some sea battles. Just going through the chat, 1211 saying firmly Team Green here. And then Sarah Kay saying I'll stay Team Black. Then just having a quick flick through Mark Matak Chopper, thank you very much for the donation. Yeah, so I think it will be sort of mixed, I think. People debating how many seasons. Then George R. Martin said he thinks it needs 4, and I think that seems to be what Ryan Condal has said, 3 or 4. So I think, I mean, they will have it mapped out now. For me, 4 seasons, including this season that we've just had, seems about right. Fall of King's Landing the first time, Fall of King's Landing the second time, Hour of the Wolf is where I think they will end them. Roberto saying this stream contains spoilers, book spoilers, not show spoilers. They've stuck roughly to the books, but there have been some significant changes so far. So if you don't mind finding out what's in the books, then stick around. If you'd rather not, then it might not be the stream for you. Never considered Team Green, says Kalnitsky. Yep, so Andrew Casing, saying House of the Dragon has been balanced with showing flaws and sympathetic aspects of both factions and characters in them. Smart way to approach it for me. So, yep, I think I would agree with that. Amy Smith saying, thoughts on the Dragonstone table. Did Stannis not use it that way because it's too showy? Obviously retconned, but yeah, I mean, yeah, I think this is just a retcon thing that they just wanted to make it slightly cooler, which is fair enough. Now, let's go to a question from, and I think I've got just about 3 more questions now from my patrons. Catherine Furseth. I'm struggling to understand the meta levels we are getting that are closer to or related to the whole story of A Song of Ice and Fire. Some bits are in the books, some are in the shows, and some are in our heads. We seem to be getting small bits of the puzzle, but how do they fit together? Weirwoods, green seeing, dragons, prophecy, dreams, the others, myths and dreams from different continents, etc. What is this story really about? What is the main point to all of this? Thanks. Well, I mean, I think there's in terms of what we're getting from the show, that adds to our understanding of A Song of Ice and Fire. The big thing has to be this concept that the Targaryens are not just conquerors. They are there, or they were there initially, on some kind of I'm thinking Blues Brothers mission from God. It's not that. It's a prophecy, an idea that they have got a role to save all of humanity. So this is important because it shifts one of the foundational things of our understanding of what George R. Martin is doing with this story, is when he talks about Robert Frost's poem, Fire and Ice, and it's like 2 different forces that could destroy the earth and either work just as well. Now, that made it appear, and that seemed to be the way that he was going with this to start with, at least, was that you have book 1 of the original trilogy that he was planning. Book 1 was this civil war. Then we have book 2, we have the invasion of the dragons, and that has to be dealt with. Then book 3, we have the invasion of the others and ice, and that has to be dealt with. And what this is doing is nuancing it a little bit so that we've got actually fire and the dragons are part of the solution to getting rid of ice. It's just that we shouldn't forget that fire in and of itself is also something which could destroy the world. So that's the big shift that we've got from a House of the Dragon in terms of understanding what George R. R. Martin is doing with this. But there's also, if you want to go meta, I think George R. R. Martin isn't writing a story with a point, a big takeaway from it. There are lots of things we can probably draw from it, in the same way, for example, Tolkien was very strong and with Lord of the Rings that this is not allegory. I cordially dislike allegory in all its forms, was what he said. A very Tolkien way of saying, I don't like it. So this, I think, is the same with George R. R. Martin. He's not writing just a story that we can take a point from. He is writing something that we can experience and we can draw truths from. Now, the one that I talked about, the meta thing here, one thing which is he definitely is using is this understanding of what is the true history here. And we've already got this. The way that he writes his books are from perspectives, and we're getting different perspectives. But we've got two very high level, two types of perspectives. One of which is we get the stories themselves. A Song of Ice and Fire and Dunk and Egg are written from people's perspectives. This is the lived experience of what is going on, and that is telling us, that is showing us what is happening, but from a very subjective perspective. We understand and we see what is happening through Tyrion's eyes and experiences, and or Arya's or Jon's or Daenerys's or whoever's. That is one way of understanding and describing history, and that matches up with the Weirwood network that is taking people's lived experiences, and Bran sees history by experiencing it. He goes back through the Weirwood tree. He doesn't just see what's happening in front of the Weirwood tree, he starts to experience it. And that is the first way of us understanding history. The second way is the other way that George R. R. Martin has written about this world, is from the perspective of maesters as historians. And this, they are trying to write something which is an overview, an attempt at being objective in some way, but all the way through it, we're always thinking, but this is just, do you have an agenda here? Are you leaving bits out that you really don't want people to know about? Are you giving us the whole story here? Who gives you the right to say what this particular character was like? And that is the second type of way that he's got. I mean, so the maesters with their stories, with their histories, is the second way of perhaps experiencing history. What we've got with House of the Dragon is not, intriguingly, it's not George R. R. Martin has pretty much clarified. This isn't him saying, actually, this is the truth of what happened. This is a different truth. He does not know. George R. R. Martin does not know. He has said in every one of these instances exactly what happened, what actually happened there between Rhaenyra and Daemon and Criston Cole that night. He doesn't know. He's written different accounts of this. The show is showing us one version of what happened. So as a kind of a meta level, this is yet more layers on this. How do we actually understand history? How can we best describe or put down or understand what has happened in the past? I hope that wasn't too theoretical, but that's the guy. I love working through how George R. R. Martin is using his writing style in order to make us think. Mara Lee, in the next 3 seasons, do you think we will visit other locations besides Winterfell and the ones we've already seen on the show? Yes, I think we will see other locations. We will definitely, I think we will see the Eyrie. We will see places where there are going to be battles or armies moving. So we'll see a lot of the Riverlands. We should see Duskendale, perhaps Rosby, a few of the places outside King's Landing in the first couple of episodes as well. And Tumbleton, which is right now for non-book readers, Tumbleton will mean nothing. But this is just a random place in the Riverlands and is just going to be the site of, horror upon horror. Basically, an army comes up and stops there. And then another army comes and there's a battle, and then they stop, and then another army comes and there's another battle, and then dragons arrive and there's more bloodshed, and then there's people being assassinated in one camp, and all of this is in this town called Tumbleton, and all of the horrors of war are therefore inflicted on this one town again and again and again, and it could get absolutely horrific. So we will see that. The thing I'm most excited about seeing is more about Harrenhal and the Isle of Faces. We could see the Isle of Faces. Adam Velaryon will fly there. He flew there in the book. Even if they don't show us actually at ground level, if they can just show us an aerial shot of the Isle of Faces, then that would be absolutely fantastic. I would love that to bits. Cast Ballerina saying, do you think Helena's obsession with spiders has some connection with her children having 6 fingers, symbolically 6-legged in Dragon Dreamer terms? I don't mean that her obsession with... spiders obviously have 8 legs. But her obsession with creepy crawlies is a really interesting one that's never really unpacked in Fire and Blood. I do wonder whether they'll try and do it here. They did, when she was holding Centipede, Millipede, or whatever it was. I did a Helaena video a couple of days ago. I don't know whether people saw that, but she's there talking about how many segments this creature's got, and then at the end of it, she says, "Oh, and the last one doesn't have any legs at all." And you do start to wonder whether this is some sort of, is everything she's saying prophetic? Is she there? That doesn't have legs at all? Is this a reference to Bran all that time later? It's not 100% clear, but she certainly seems to see things in and with these creepy crawlies, it has to be said. I don't think there's any kind of particular link between them and her children, but we'll have to wait and see what they do on the show on that one, I think. Curtis Frank saying, I'm perfectly happy with her just liking bugs. Yeah, this is what we try and read too much into this sometimes, perhaps, but it's entirely possible this is just, she does like bugs. Carl Karsnark saying, spiders or der Spinner are often used as a symbol of fate or prophecy or dreams. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, spiders' webs and things, obviously. Greet Weirwood saying 16 kings to Bran. Okay, that's a good spot. That's just having a quick flick through. People are talking about Renly. I have no idea why people are talking about Renly there. And Hosizu Bant saying, I think Spider Dreams refers to the political game itself. Yeah, interestingly, yeah. So the spiders in Game of Thrones do definitely have a link across with Varys, who was the spider, with politics and the great game. The King's Road, last question from one of my patrons. The King's Road saying, G'day, Robert. G'day. In true IDG fashion, we say, when in doubt, blame Bloodraven. Absolutely. Can you tie Bloodraven into House of the Dragon somehow? Perhaps he's watching. Well, yes, I can. Of course I can, happily. This is well before Bloodraven is born. But the key thing here is the Weirwood trees, because weirwood trees, Bloodraven sees through the weirwood trees. You can actually go through time in seeing things through weirwood trees. Bran has done that as well. So Bloodraven could definitely see, in show canon, he could see all of those secret conversations which happened in front of the weirwood. All of that he will have known about. So he will understand a lot of the politics and the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons. Then we have to say, well, where else? And the weirwood tree, it has to be said, is in King's Landing. That was a deliberate inclusion by the showrunners, because there wasn't one in Game of Thrones. Certainly in A Song of Ice and Fire, there isn't one there. So the clear implication is that this is a weirwood tree that they've decided, we are going to include this in here. We're going to make this a centerpiece of one of the key bits of set that we have here, knowing that at some point between here and now and the period when A Song of Ice and Fire happens, that tree will be chopped down or something. So they deliberately included it there. They could have had people just in a garden or in a courtyard or something like that, but they decided to have those conversations in front of a weirwood tree. So this means that the weirwood network, and hence Bloodraven, as he can see back in time and through the weirwood trees, they know everything about what's happening there, and they will have an interest in what the Targaryens are doing, because clearly the weirwood network are concerned about what's coming from the north, which the Targaryens are also concerned about. Now, we will see another weirwood tree, at least one more weirwood tree in the show, at Harrenhal. And the other person who is at Harrenhal is a magic user, Alice Rivers. It would not surprise me in the slightest if Alice Rivers turns out to be feeling quite weirwoody on the side of the weirwoods. Yes, the way that she was written in the book made her feel a lot more like Melisandre, say, but she is she's a magic user. She's based there in Harrenhal, which has got a lot of imagery of the weirwoods going on there. Lots of weirwoods were used in the construction of Harrenhal, and it's on the shore of the God's Eye Lake, which is in the middle of which is the Isle of Faces, of course, the heart of the weirwood network. So her being there will then link across to the fact that the person she becomes the lover of is Aemond, and Aemond has a clear link across, symbolically at least, to Bloodraven. So this is a kind of a link across. We still haven't got any definitive evidence of anything at all, but the last thing, which is I think going to be symbolically important, is the fact that we are going to get the deaths of Daemon and Aemond, as well as two dragons, in the God's Eye Lake. And we know that this is how the weirwood networks suck up information. They suck up experiences. They learn about things by people's lives through the blood sacrifice. So this is going to happen when Daemon and Aemond die. They're going to suddenly learn about what's going on with the Targaryens. And Daemon has learned about the prophecy now. Maybe not all of the details of the prophecy, but he has learned about the fact that there is this prophecy that Viserys had, which he passed down to Rhaenyra. And if he knows about that, then that means that the weirwood network will then know about that, which means that Bloodraven will then know about that. And that makes sense for why Bloodraven suddenly started getting interested in how do we join together the Targaryens and the Starks, that is how we loop together back around to Bloodraven. I will do a video on all of this at some point, but the moment you stop thinking of Bloodraven as being Bloodraven, you start thinking about Bloodraven as being the Weirwood Network, and you go, well, what's the Weirwood Network learned in this show so far? Quite a lot. And that then we then start seeing House Blackwood getting introduced into the action. House Blackwood would be very important because Bloodraven's mother was a Blackwood, and so also Aegon V's wife was a Blackwood. Blackwood blood is an important part in the strand of the prince that was promised a sort of heritage. So I hope that makes sense. As I'll make a video on that one at some point. Let's Effective Rambling saying this is not abnormal for IDG, Kaziglu, but I don't know what people were saying was abnormal for me, but going on for 3 hours, yes, this is yeah, I wouldn't say it's not abnormal. I do this sometimes. Emma Sherman saying, are you still hoping we won't see the Isle of Faces? I remember you saying that before the season aired. I mean, I have I'm in two minds about this. I think part of me wants the mystery to be maintained. I want to see it from the outside, is what I think. Him, Adam Velaryon landing, and us sort of see him going and having a chat with the children of the forest and the green men and whatever else. I think I'm okay without that. I think I'm okay with the mystery, but I want to see what it looks like because we haven't really ever seen what it looks like. Now is the time to drop any more questions into the chat. I'll try and pick up a few more questions as we go. Andrew Kay saying, guessing by the glimpse we saw of Harrenhal, any more we see of it in House of the Dragon will likely look incredible. Yeah, this has also had a slight shift from how it looked in Game of Thrones. It looked really good there, but it looked completely unlivable in Harrenhal. Should look like it has been melted by dragonfire. It should look black and charred. But at the same time, this isn't just a decrepit ruin. At a ground level, this is a living, breathing, working castle, and a massive castle, the biggest castle in the land. So if they've shifted that to make it actually feel like it's a proper castle rather than just a sort of a desolate ruin, then I think that's a good thing. Username redacted saying, if we see the wall, will we see a peak version of the Night's Watch? Not a peak version, no. But basically what we know, it's not a peak version because when Alison went to the wall, she went there and she saw that the Night's Watch at the Night Fort were, it was far too big for them. The Night Fort is massive, and there weren't that many people there. And she said, "Okay, I'm bankrolling, building a new fort for you just over there. That's the right size for you." So they then moved there. So this is not peak Night's Watch at this point. It's just a few notches later. The Night's Watch had been decreasing in strength and importance for a very long time, and where it was there was still greater than where it was when we get to A Song of Ice and Fire, because by the time of A Song of Ice and Fire, they've abandoned all but 3 of the forts. But it's nowhere near the peak of where it was. Agree Weirwood saying, I said earlier I'd rather have more dragons paid for than Henry Cavill's salary. Yeah, I can understand that. Kieran Grant saying, I always pictured Cregan Stark as looking older for his age and with a beard. Aemon's actor is only 22 but looks 32. I think, he should be young, but yes, I think he should have a sort of big grizzly beard, so look a little bit older. Curtis Frank saying, I want to see that Adam did go to the Isle of Faces. I do not want to see anything more, particularly what happened or what is going on the Isle. Yeah, I think that's where I'm at. I want to see that he goes there. I want to see the Isle of Faces from the outside, and a dragon landing and just seeing the weirwood trees rippling with the air. That would work. Let's just having a quick flick through the chat as well. The reflective ramblings saying thank you for the additional streams and the work you've done. This is for me. Thank you for the charity 7,600. Thank you so much, everyone. So I will do this is your final chance. If you've been watching these live streams, I've been doing them for 10, 11 weeks going through the show. Also did them for Rings of Power. As of next week, I will be going back to my normal Thursday-only live streams. So this is the last Sunday one for a while. This is, if you've enjoyed them and you want to show your appreciation in some way, and if you can afford it, the way I'm asking you to do that is by donating for Alzheimer's care and research. So this is your last plea for that. If you're watching this back a little bit later, there will be links somewhere as well, so don't feel that you're missing out just because you're not watching it live. Thank you so much for everyone who has donated. The Andrew Case saying, I don't see Henry Cavill or such megastar level actors being cast in this universe. They tend to go for less household names and more up and coming types. Yeah, they do. I could imagine them having someone like Henry Cavill for maybe a one-off series. I think that one of the things, if we're trying not to go down a conspiracy theory about why Henry Cavill might have left The Witcher, I think he is so in demand that the idea of him doing more than 3 seasons of something is quite significant. So I think that if he could do something short term, maybe a season of something, I think he would be up for it. But more than that, probably no, would be my guess. In terms of who they go for with Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, they've gone for up and coming actors, and also what I'm hoping we'll get a bit more of. One thing they did really well in Game of Thrones was the classically trained, excellent theatre actors who can come in and just absolutely boss it. People like Diana Rigg, who just were amazing, and you can just sort of bring them in, and also Tywin Lannister. What is his name? I always forget people's names on this show, but you know who I mean. In the High Sparrow, when they just had a handful of absolutely top draw actors coming in, that just elevated the whole show to another level. And that's the kind of thing that I hope they carry on doing for this. By you can have a young cast with a couple of names of established actors. I mean, they've got Matt Smith, Paddy Considine may well not have been a famous name to many people, but he was very much an established actor in the UK and well known. But others, Emma Darcy, people like that, you may have heard of them, but they're not that well known. And obviously the younger generation are largely fresh out of theatre school and things like that. So I would love to have a few more of those absolutely top draw actors just dropping in randomly for not just this show, but all of the spin-offs from Game of Thrones. Kieran Grant saying most of the House of the Dragon actors aren't superstars; they're just talented. Yeah, I mean, I think the only one who was like close to being a big star name was Matt Smith. I think when they announced all the actors for House of the Dragon, and even he's not. I mean, yes, he's well known, and I think everybody knows who he is, but he's not like he's not Henry Cavill kind of level of fame of like leading man in lots of different big budget films. Charles Dance, thank you very much, everyone. Of course, I forget that Okay. And Jonathan Price is the High Sparrow. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think he did an excellent job as well. And I think with that, I'm going to start drawing this one to a close. Thank you so much if you have donated. Thank you, moderators. You are amazing. Thank you, patrons. I cannot do this without your support, and I appreciate it hugely. If you are watching this back a little bit later, appearing somewhere around here will be a link to other live streams that I've done. Appearing somewhere around here will be a link to my Patreon page. If you wish to support this channel, that is the best way of doing so. Thank you so much, everyone. I will be back on Thursday for another live stream. I'll probably make that one another open Q&A. And there will be more videos coming up over the course of the next few days and weeks. Take care, everyone, and I shall see you again soon.